He never called when I passed the bar. He did not show up when I made partner. But on Monday morning, January 12th, 2026, a desperate application from his sinking firm landed on my desk. The financials are bleeding red. He has no idea the managing partner who will decide his future is the daughter he once laughed off as too soft to win. By the time he recognizes me, it will be too late. My name is Aurora Sanders, and in the high-stakes world of corporate litigation, I have learned that silence is often the loudest sound in the room. It was Monday morning, January 12th, 2026, and the air in my corner office at Westbridge & Crow hummed with the specific, hermetically sealed quiet of absolute power. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, the gray skyline of the city looked like a circuit board of steel and ambition, but inside, the temperature was controlled. The coffee was brewed from beans harvested on a single estate in Costa Rica, and the chaos of the world was kept at bay by a legion of security guards and paralegals 3 floors down. I adjusted the cuff of my silk blouse and glanced at the schedule on my tablet. It was going to be a brutal week. We were in the middle of a hostile acquisition defense for a pharmaceutical giant, and the opposing counsel was playing dirty with discovery documents. I was ready for a fight. I had spent the last decade turning myself into a weapon of precision, stripping away the soft parts of my personality until all that remained was the law and the win. I was good at it. In fact, I was one of the best. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who anticipated my needs before I even fully formed the thought, knocked once on the glass door and entered. She was carrying a thick cream-colored envelope, holding it with both hands as if it were a loaded gun or a religious artifact. "This just arrived via courier. Aurora Sanders," Sarah said, her voice tight. It was flagged as time-sensitive. The courier insisted it go directly to a managing partner. "Since you are the lead on the expansion committee this quarter, I brought it straight to you." I held out my hand. The envelope was heavy. Expensive stock. The kind of linen paper that old-school firms used to signal prestige, unaware that in the modern legal market, prestige was measured in net income per partner and technological integration. Not stationary weight. I turned it over. The wax seal on the back was archaic, almost comical in its pretension. Then I flipped it back to the front and read the return address. My heart did not race. My breath did not hitch. My training took over instantly, freezing my autonomic nervous system into a state of combat readiness. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. Hale, Mercer, and Rowe. The name hit me like a bucket of ice water thrown into a sleeping face. Hale. My father's name. The firm he built from the ground up. The kingdom he ruled with an iron fist and a voice that could curdle milk. The place where I had spent my childhood waiting in the lobby, hoping for 5 minutes of his attention, only to be told he was billing hours and could not be disturbed. I had not spoken to Calvin Hale in 7 years. I had not seen him in 8. "Is everything all right?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "You look pale." "I am fine," I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. "Thank you. Sarah, you can leave it." She hesitated, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, but she knew better than to pry. She nodded and backed out, closing the heavy glass door behind her. I was alone. I stared at the envelope. It sat on the polished mahogany of my desk, an intruder from a past I had surgically removed. Why was it here? Why now? Why Westbridge & Crow? I reached for my silver letter opener. My hand was steady, but there was a phantom tremor in my fingertips, a ghost of the little girl who used to tremble when he raised his voice. I sliced the envelope open with a single, clean motion. Inside was a proposal packet, bound in spiral plastic with a clear cover. The title page read, "Strategic Partnership Proposal. Hale, Mercer, and Rowe and Westbridge & Crow. A partnership." I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. I flipped past the cover letter, which was undoubtedly filled with buzzwords about synergy and shared values. I did not care about their words. Words were wind. Words were what lawyers used to lie. I cared about the truth, and in my world, the truth lived in one place and one place only: the numbers. I turned straight to the financial addendum at the back of the packet. This was where the bodies were buried. I ran my finger down the columns, my eyes scanning the profit and loss statements, the balance sheets, and the cash flow projections. I did not need a calculator. I could see the patterns floating on the page like oil on water. Revenue was down 12% year over year. That was bad, but survivable. But the overhead? The overhead was catastrophic. They were bleeding cash on lease agreements for Class A office space they clearly could no longer afford. Their associate attrition rate was nearly 30%, which meant the people doing the actual work were fleeing the ship. But the real story, the tragedy hidden in the rows of black and red ink, was the partner draw. Despite the falling revenue, the senior partners were still pulling out their full draws. They were cannibalizing the firm's capital to maintain their lifestyles. It was the classic death spiral of a legacy firm. They were eating the seed corn. I looked at the client list. It was shrinking. 3 major insurance carriers had dropped them in the last 18 months. That was their bread and butter. Without those retainers, they were relying on contingency fees from high-risk litigation, and looking at their win-loss record, they were not winning enough to cover the spread. This was not a proposal for a strategic partnership. This was a rescue flare fired from a sinking life raft. I flipped back to the cover letter. It was signed by the managing committee. The first signature, large and looping, taking up twice as much space as the others, was his, Calvin Hale. "We believe," the letter read, "that a merger of our resources would create a dominant force in the regional market, leveraging the historic reputation of Hale, Mercer, and Rowe with the global reach of Westbridge." Historic reputation. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. He was selling his history because he had no future. He was trying to attach his dying star to our rising sun, hoping we would not notice the rot until the contracts were signed. And he had sent it here, to Westbridge. Did he know? I closed my eyes for a second, searching my memory. When I joined Westbridge and Crow, I had already made a name for myself, but I was just an associate. I had risen through the ranks with a speed that frightened my peers, fueled by a terrifying work ethic that left no room for a personal life. I had made partner in 5 years, managing partner in 8. But my bio on the firm's website was deliberately vague about my early life. I never listed my hometown. I never listed my undergraduate institution if it overlapped with his sphere of influence. To the world, I had simply appeared, fully formed. A shark born in the deep ocean, and my last name. I still used Hale legally, but professionally. I often went by my mother's maiden name in the early years, or simply just A. Hale on filings. It was a common enough name. He did not know. The realization settled over me with a cold clarity. He had applied to Westbridge and Crow because we were the biggest player in the market, the only firm with enough capital to absorb their debt and keep them afloat. He had no idea that the person holding his fate in her manicured hands was the daughter he had told, to her face, that she lacked the killer instinct to be a real lawyer. "Too soft," he had said. "You have too much heart. Aurora Sanders. Law is about the jugular. You just want to make friends." I looked down at the financials again. The jugular was right there, exposed and pulsing. I reached for my desk phone and pressed the speed dial for Sarah. "Yes, Aurora Sanders?" She answered on the first ring. "The packet from Hale, Mercer, and Rowe," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Reply to the sender. Tell them we have received their proposal." "Standard rejection letter?" Sarah asked. "We rejected 95% of these unsolicited merger requests." "No," I said. "Tell them we are interested in a preliminary conversation. Schedule a pitch meeting for tomorrow afternoon, 2:00. There was a pause on the line. Sarah was surprised. This was unprecedented speed for a firm of our size. Usually, these things went through a committee review that took weeks. "Tomorrow at 2:00, Sarah repeated, typing. "Do you want me to specify who should attend from their side?" "Yes," I said, and a dark, cold satisfaction uncoiled in my chest. Tell them we require the physical presence of every senior decision-maker listed on their partnership agreement. No proxies, no video calls. If they want us to consider if they want us to consider partnering with them, they need to be here in the flesh. Understood, Sarah said. And from our side, who should I invite? Just the acquisition team, I said. And ensure the conference room is the one with the view of the bay, the one with the glass walls. The fishbowl, Sarah said. Got it. And Sarah? Yes? Make sure they know that the managing partner will be leading the review personally, but do not give them my name yet. Just say, the managing partner. Let them sweat a little. Of course, Sarah said. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled out beneath me, a grid of concrete and aspiration. I could see the harbor in the distance, the gray water choppy under the winter wind. I thought about the man who was coming tomorrow. I thought about the way he used to dominate every room he entered, sucking the oxygen out of the air so that no one else could breathe. I thought about the way he would interrupt my mother, my brother, and me, correcting our grammar, our posture, our ambitions. He had built a monument to himself in the form of a law firm. And now that monument was crumbling. He was not coming here to catch up. He was not coming here because he had heard I was doing well and wanted to express pride. He was not coming to apologize for missing my graduation, for missing the swearing-in ceremony, for missing my life. He was coming because the wolves were at the door, and he had run out of ammo. He was coming to beg. He just did not know it yet. I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the window. My reflection ghosted back at me. Sharp cheekbones, tailored suit, eyes that gave nothing away. I looked nothing like the 9-year-old girl in the floral dress who used to cry when he shouted. I was the managing partner of Westbridge & Crow. I controlled an operating budget of $400 million a year. I had destroyed companies larger than his before breakfast. Tomorrow, he would walk into my room. He would sit at my table, and for the first time in his life, he would have to listen. I did not do this out of kindness. I did not schedule the meeting to save him. I did not even do it to humiliate him. Not really. I did it because I wanted to see his face when he realized that the only thing standing between him and ruin was the girl he had thrown away. I wanted to watch who spoke first, and I wanted to see who flinched. The skyline blurred slightly as a sudden rain shower swept in from the coast, hitting the glass with 1,000 tiny, aggressive taps. I watched the water streak down, distorting the world outside. "Hello, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. The words felt foreign, heavy in my mouth, but tomorrow they would be a weapon. I turned back to my desk. I had work to do. I had to prepare. I opened the file again. Picking up a red pen, I began to circle every inconsistency, every inflated asset, every hidden liability. If he wanted a review, I would give him a review. I would take his firm apart piece by piece, dissecting it with the cold, clinical precision of the surgeon he claimed I could never be. The application sat on my desk, polished and confident on the surface, but screaming in quiet desperation underneath. It was a lie wrapped in linen paper. Tomorrow, I would tear the wrapping paper off. Memory is not a straight line. It is a series of evidentiary exhibits, filed away in the dark, waiting to be pulled during cross-examination. Standing in my office, looking at the rain distorting the city lights, I did not just see the proposal on my desk. I saw the exhibits. Exhibit A. I was 9 years old. The library in our house was a sanctuary of dark wood and the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco. It was my father's domain, a place where children were only allowed by invitation, which meant we were almost never allowed. I had crept in to retrieve a book I had left on the floor. A heavy encyclopedic volume about ocean life. I was small for my age, quiet, the kind of child who moved like a shadow. My father was there, standing by the fireplace with Uncle Marcus. Marcus was not really my uncle, but a senior partner at the firm, a man with a laugh like a diesel engine. They did not hear me enter. They were drinking scotch, the crystal tumblers clinking softly. "The boy is a firecracker," Marcus was saying. He was talking about Evan. He has that aggression. Calvin, you can't teach that. He knocked that kid down in soccer practice and didn't even look back to see if he was crying. That is a closer mentality, my father chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. Evan is going to be fine. He has the instinct. And the girl? Marcus asked. Aurora Sanders? She is reading at a high school level, isn't she? I froze behind the leather armchair, clutching my book about sharks. I waited for the praise. I waited for him to tell Marcus about my report card, about the poem I wrote that won the school contest, about how I organized the pantry alphabetically without being asked. Aurora Sanders, my father said, and his voice changed. It lost the warmth. It became dismissive, flat. Aurora Sanders is sweet. She is bright. Certainly. But she is not built for this world. Marcus. She is too porous. She feels things too much. You know the type. She will make a wonderful teacher, or maybe a librarian. But she is not built for law. She is too soft to win. Too soft to win. The words did not hurt like a bruise. They hurt like a paper cut. Thin, sharp, and stinging every time I moved. I backed out of the room without my book. I went upstairs and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, looking for the softness he saw. I poked my cheek. I looked at my eyes. I promised myself I would harden. Exhibit B, the uneven scales, over the next few years. I became an actuary of my own family dynamic. I tracked the data. When Evan, my brother who was 2 years older, managed to get a C+ on a math test he had barely studied for, my father took him out for ice cream. You improvised, my father told him, clapping him on the back. You didn't know the formulas, so you used logic to get halfway there. That is what a litigator does. Evan, you think on your feet. 2 weeks later, I brought home a perfect score on a history exam. I had studied for 3 weeks. I had memorized dates, battles, and geopolitical consequences. I placed the paper on my father's desk while he was reviewing case files. He glanced at it, nodded once, and slid it aside. Good diligence, Aurora Sanders. But be careful. You do not want to become a grinder. Anyone can memorize facts. It is the narrative that matters. My success was dismissed as administrative labor. Evan's mediocrity was framed as genius in potential. If I won, it was because I had help, or because the teacher was easy, or because I got lucky. If Evan won, it was destiny. If I lost, it was expected. If Evan lost, it was a conspiracy against him. Exhibit C, the empty chair, high school, the state debate championships. I was 17. I had spent 4 months preparing for the final round. The topic was the ethics of corporate liability in environmental disasters. I knew the arguments better than I knew the lyrics to my favorite songs. I had destroyed the competition in the district and regional rounds. I called his secretary 3 times to confirm the date. He has it on the calendar. Aurora Sanders. She told me. He wouldn't miss it. The auditorium was cold and smelled of floor wax. I stood at the podium, my notes organized in color-coded binders. I looked out into the audience. I saw my mother, looking anxious and checking her watch. I saw Evan, slouching in his seat, playing a game on his phone. Next to my mother was an empty folding chair. I waited. The moderator called my name. I looked at the doors at the back of the hall, willing them to open, willing him to stride in with his expensive suit and his confident air. The doors stayed closed. I turned back to the microphone. I swallowed the lump in my throat that felt like a stone, and then I proceeded to dismantle my opponent with a ferocity that made the judges uncomfortable. I did not just win. I annihilated the other team's logic until they were stuttering and silent. I won the state title. I held the trophy, a heavy brass thing, and felt absolutely nothing. When I got home, he was in the kitchen, eating leftovers. I won, I said, putting the trophy on the counter. I heard, he said, not looking up from his plate. Good job, Rory. You weren't there. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were devoid of guilt. They were simply pragmatic. A client had an emergency injunction. Aurora Sanders. Real life does not stop for high school games. Clients do not wait. You understand that, don't you? Clients do not wait. The implication was clear. I was not a client. I was an obligation, and a low-priority one at that. Exhibit D. The breaking point. It happened when I was 22, just before I started law school. I had been accepted into a top-tier program, one of the best in the country. Even he had to admit it was prestigious, though he called it impressive on paper. As if the paper was trying to trick him, he took us to dinner to celebrate. Not just family, but two of his junior partners were there. We were at a steakhouse in the city, the kind of place with white tablecloths and waiters who scraped crumbs off the table with little silver blades. The wine was flowing. My father was holding court, telling war stories about his recent victories. Evan was nodding along, laughing at the right moments, playing the role of the heir apparent. Evan was struggling in a third-tier law school, barely passing his torts class, but at this table, he was treated like a prodigy. "So, Aurora Sanders," one of the partners asked, trying to be polite. "You are off to the Ivy League in the fall. Do you know what kind of law you want to practice?" Before I could answer, my father laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Oh, she won't be in the trenches with us, Bob," my father said, swirling his Cabernet. "Aurora Sanders doesn't have the stomach for corporate blood sport. She is too ethical. She will end up doing small claims work, or maybe family law, helping people argue over who gets the golden retriever." The table went silent for a beat. Then, the partners laughed. It was a nervous, obligatory laugh, but they laughed. Evan laughed too, a loud braying sound that pierced right through me. "She will be the best damn small claims lawyer in the county," my father added, raising his glass in a mock toast. "To Aurora Sanders, queen of the minor disputes." The air left the room. The sound of their laughter seemed to stretch out, warping and twisting. I looked at my father. He was smiling, his face flushed with wine and arrogance. He did not see a daughter. He saw a prop for his joke. I did not cry. I did not scream. Something inside me, a final fragile tether that had been holding me to him for 22 years, simply snapped. It was a quiet break, clean, irreversible. I stood up. "Aurora Sanders?" my mother whispered, reaching for my hand. I pulled my hand away. "I have a headache," I said calmly. "I am going to head back." "Sit down, Rory," my father said, his voice dropping. "Don't be dramatic. It was a joke." "Enjoy your steak," I said. I walked out of the restaurant. I walked past the coat check, past the valet stand. I got into my sedan, a used car I had bought with my own savings from summer jobs. I drove onto the highway, merging into the night traffic. I turned off the radio. I drove in silence for 2 hours, watching the red taillights of the cars ahead of me. In that silence, I made a vow. It was not a vow of revenge, not yet. It was a vow of erasure. I would never ask him for approval again. I would never show him a report card, a trophy, or an acceptance letter. I would never beg to be seen. If he thought I was small, I would become so big he would choke on it. If he thought I was soft, I would become a diamond, beautiful, hard, and capable of cutting glass. I went to law school. I did not just study. I consumed the law. I treated every case study like a live grenade that I had to defuse. I stopped writing poetry. I stopped dating. I stopped going home for holidays. I graduated second in my class. I could have been first, but I spent my final semester clerking for a federal judge known for his cruelty, just to see if I could handle it. I did not apply to his firm. I did not apply to firms that were friendly with him. I went to the city, to the Shark Tank. I joined Westbridge and Crowe as a junior associate in the litigation department. The work was brutal. We worked 90-hour weeks. We slept under our desks. We ate vending machine food at 3 a.m. People quit. People broke down crying in the elevators. I thrived. I took the pressure and I compressed it. I turned anxiety into preparation. I turned fear into adrenaline. When other associates were panicking about a motion, I was already drafting the appeal. I stopped looking for validation. I looked for results. My style was not loud. I did not pound tables like my father. I did not shout. I was quiet. I was the person in the room who knew every footnote, every precedent, every comma in the contract. I won because by the time the opposing counsel realized what I was doing, I had already closed the trap. I made senior associate in 3 years, partner in 5. I started handling 9-figure disputes. I defended hostile takeovers. I dismantled class action lawsuits that threatened to bankrupt Fortune 500 companies. I became known as the Ice Queen, the surgeon, the one you call when you cannot afford to lose. I heard from my mother occasionally. She would call me on Sunday afternoons, her voice thin and worried. She would tell me about the garden, about the neighbors, about Evan's latest fumble at the firm that my father had to clean up. "Your father asks about you," she would say, trying to bridge the gap. "Does he?" I would ask, typing an email while I held the phone to my ear. "Well, he mentions you. Sometimes. He saw your name in the journal when you won that tech case." "What did he say?" He said it was a lucky break that the judge ruled that way." "Of course," I said. "Lucky? He mentioned me the way people mention the weather in a distant country. 'Oh, I hear it is raining in London.' 'Oh, I hear Aurora Sanders won a case.' It was a fact that existed outside of his reality, something that did not touch him. He did not know I was tracking him too. I read the trade papers. I saw the lawsuits piling up against Hale, Mercer, and Rowe. I saw the departure of key talent. I saw the desperate marketing campaigns. I knew he was failing, and I knew, with the certainty of a mathematician, that eventually the variables would align. And now, looking at the packet on my desk, the timeline was complete. The wound he had opened at that dinner table, the wound he had picked at for 20 years, had never truly healed. I had just built a layer of armor over it, layer by layer, year by year. But underneath the armor, the 9-year-old girl was still there. She was still holding the book about sharks, but she wasn't scared anymore. She was waiting, and she was hungry. I picked up the internal phone line. "Sarah," I said, "get me the dossier on the Hale firm's partners. I want to know everything. Who is divorced? Who has a gambling problem? Who is leveraging their equity? I want it all on my desk by 6 tomorrow morning." "Consider it done," Sarah said. I hung up. The wound did not hurt tonight. Tonight, it felt like fuel. The digital clock on the wall of the anteroom read 2:08 in the afternoon. I was exactly 8 minutes late. In the world of high-stakes corporate law, 8 minutes was a calculated insult. It was long enough to be noticed, but short enough to be excused as the busy schedule of a decision-maker. I stood outside the glass walls of Conference Room B, the one we called the fishbowl because it offered nowhere to hide. My assistant, Sarah, stood beside me, holding a tablet and looking nervous. "They have been waiting since 1:55, Sarah whispered. "Mr. Hale asked twice if there was a scheduling error." "Let him ask," I said. I adjusted the lapel of my charcoal blazer. I had chosen this suit carefully. It was severe, tailored to within a millimeter of perfection, and it cost more than the car I drove to law school. I was not dressing for a family reunion. I was dressing for an execution. "Do they know who is coming in?" I asked. "No," Sarah confirmed. "I told them the managing partner for acquisitions would be leading the review. I did not give a name." "Good. Open the door." Sarah swiped her keycard, and the heavy glass door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. I walked in. There were 3 men sitting at the long oval table made of imported walnut. As I entered, they stood up in a ragged wave of motion. I recognized them instantly, though time had eroded them in subtle ways. On the left was Arthur Mercer, the tax specialist. He looked tired, his skin gray and papery. On the right was Julian Rowe, the litigator who used to give me peppermint candies when I was 6. He looked anxious, his eyes darting toward the door as if looking for an exit, and in the center, commanding the room even as his empire crumbled, was Calvin Hale. My father. He looked older. The silver in his hair had turned to a stark, snowy white. His shoulders were still broad, but the suit hung slightly loose on his frame, hinting at recent weight loss. But the eyes were the same, steel blue, assessing, and utterly devoid of warmth. He wore his arrogance like a second skin. I did not smile. I did not offer my hand. I walked to the head of the table, placed my folder on the surface with a deliberate, heavy thud, and sat down. The three men hesitated, then sat back down. "Good afternoon," I said. My voice was low, modulated, stripped of any regional accent. It was the voice of the firm. "I apologize for the delay. We are currently closing a multinational merger that required my attention. It was a power move. I was telling them that while they were the most important thing in their world, they were barely a footnote in mine." "We understand," Calvin said. His voice was rich, a baritone that had charmed juries for 40 years. "We appreciate Westbridge and Crow making the time. I am Calvin Hale, senior partner at Hale, Mercer, and Rowe." He gestured to his colleagues. Introducing them, I nodded once at each name, my expression blank. I did not introduce myself. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. "Well," Calvin cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "As you have seen from our proposal, we believe there is a unique opportunity here, a strategic partnership. Our firm has a legacy in the Midwest that is unmatched. We have 50 years of relationships. We see a synergy between your global reach and our local dominance." He was using the script. I knew he would. He was selling the past because the present was bankrupt. "Synergy," I repeated. The word sounded flat in the air. "That is an interesting word choice. Mr. Hale." I opened the folder in front of me. I did not look at him. I looked at the spreadsheet. "I have reviewed your financials," I said, keeping my eyes on the paper. "I see a 12% decline in gross revenue over the last fiscal year. I see a 19% increase in overhead, and I see a partnership draw that has remained static despite these losses." I looked up then. Meeting his gaze for the first time, I made sure my face remained a mask. "In my department, we do not call that synergy. We call that a liquidity crisis." Arthur Mercer flinched. Julian Rowe looked down at his hands. Calvin, however, did not blink. "The market has been volatile," Calvin said smoothly. It was the automatic response of a man who believed he could talk his way out of gravity. "The entire sector has seen a correction. We are simply positioning ourselves for the rebound. Our fundamentals are strong." "The sector grew by 6% last year," I corrected him. "Westbridge and Crow grew by 8% in the same region you operate in. The market is not shrinking. Mr. Hale, your market share is—" Calvin's smile tightened at the edges. He was not used to being fact-checked. He was used to being the loudest voice in the room. "We have had some transition," he admitted, waving a hand dismissively. "Some older clients have retired. It is a natural cycle." "Is it?" I flipped a page in the file. "Let us talk about the Vanguard Logistics account." The air in the room instantly went cold. Vanguard was a massive shipping conglomerate. They had been with my father's firm for 20 years. They were the whale that kept the lights on. "Vanguard is evaluating their options," Calvin said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "Vanguard left you 3 months ago," I said. "They moved their entire litigation portfolio to a boutique firm called Kincaid and Lewis. They went with a lowball bidder," Calvin scoffed. "Kincaid is a strip mall operation. They will be back when they realize you get what you pay for." "Kincaid and Lewis is not a discount firm," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. "I know their managing partner. Their billable rates are 15% higher than yours. Vanguard did not leave to save money. Mr. Hale, they paid a premium to leave." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. "I spoke to the general counsel at Vanguard yesterday as part of my due diligence. Do you want to know what she told me?" Calvin stared at me. His knuckles were white where he gripped the armrests of his chair. "I am sure you are going to tell me. She said that your firm had become slow." She said that your strategy was outdated. She said that when she asked for a risk assessment on a digital privacy issue, you sent her a memo that cited case law from 1998. I let that hang in the air. That is not a market correction. That is incompetence. Julian Rowe made a small, choking sound. Calvin's face turned a shade of red I remembered from my childhood. It was the color of his temper. He leaned forward, matching my posture. Now, listen here, he said, his voice losing its polished veneer. I have practiced law for 45 years. I have forgotten more about litigation than you have ever learned. You are looking at a spreadsheet. I am telling you about relationships. You cannot quantify loyalty. I can quantify loss, I replied calmly. And right now, your loyalty is costing you $200,000 a month in operating deficits. I turned the page again. Let us discuss the succession plan. Your proposal lists your son, Evan Hale, as the incoming managing partner within 24 months. Evan is a bright young man, Calvin said quickly. He has the instinct. He has brought in significant new business. I see the business he brought in, I said. I see 3 tech startups that dissolved within 6 months of signing, and I see a sexual harassment settlement paid out to a paralegal that was listed under miscellaneous office expenses in your ledger. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just landed but not yet detonated. Mercer and Rowe looked at Calvin with horror. They evidently did not know about the ledger entry. Or perhaps they did. And they were horrified that I knew. That was a misunderstanding, Calvin stammered. A nuisance suit. We settled to avoid the distraction. It is a liability, I said. And it speaks to a culture of concealment. You are asking Westbridge and Crow to absorb your debts, your lease, and your liabilities. You are asking us to dilute our equity to save a sinking ship. And you offer us nothing in return but a damaged brand and a succession plan built on nepotism. I closed the folder. The sound was final, like a gavel striking wood. This does not fit our strategic needs, I said. Westbridge and Crow declines your proposal. I stood up. The meeting had lasted less than 15 minutes. Calvin remained seated for a second, stunned. He had expected a negotiation. He had expected to charm me, to bully me, to trade war stories until I signed the check. He was not prepared for a summary dismissal. He scrambled to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You cannot be serious, he snapped. The charm was gone. The desperation was pouring out now, ugly and raw. You haven't even heard our restructuring plan. You looked at 5 numbers and decided to kill a 50-year legacy? Who do you think you are? I watched him. I watched the vein throbbing in his forehead. I watched the way he tried to make himself physically larger, a tactic that had worked on me when I was 9, but meant nothing to me now. I am the person who did the reading, I said. This is insulting, Calvin shouted. He pointed a finger at me. I demand to speak to your senior committee. I know people in this city. I will not be dismissed by some bureaucratic functionary who thinks she knows how the real world works because she has an MBA and a calculator. He was looking right at me, but he still did not see me. He saw a suit. He saw an obstacle. He saw a woman, which in his taxonomy meant someone to be talked over. You are making a mistake, he hissed. You are walking away from the best legal minds in the state. You are letting your ego get in the way of business. My ego? I asked softly. I walked around the edge of the table. I moved slowly, deliberately. I stopped 3 feet away from him. You told me once that law was about the jugular, I said. You told me that if you want to win, you have to be willing to cut out the soft parts. Calvin froze. His hand, still raised to point at me, wavered, his brow furrowed. The words were familiar to him. They echoed something he had said 1,000 times, a mantra he had repeated at dinner tables and holiday parties. But the context, the voice. You said that I was not built for this, I continued, my voice steady, devoid of anger, devoid of love. You said I was too porous, that I would end up doing small claims work. He blinked. He looked at my eyes, He looked at the shape of my jaw. He looked at the way I held my hands, clasping my wrists, a habit I had picked up from my mother. The recognition did not happen all at once. It was a slow, dawning horror. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched his mouth open slightly, struggling to form a word. He looked from my face to the nameplate on the door, then back to my face. He looked at the woman who had just dismantled his life's work in 10 minutes, and he tried to reconcile her with the daughter he had stopped calling 7 years ago. "Aurora Sanders?" he whispered. The word came out like a question. Fragile and terrified. The room was silent. Mercer and Rowe were staring at us, confused, sensing a ghost had just entered the room. I looked him in the eye. I let him see everything. I let him see the steel. I let him see the diamond-hard surface I had built over the soft girl he despised. "Hello, Dad?" I said. The silence in the conference room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and solid enough to choke on. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a car crash. The split second after the metal stops screeching and before the screaming starts, Arthur Mercer and Julian Rowe were frozen in a state of suspended animation. They looked from me to Calvin, then back to me, their eyes wide and unblinking. They were men who had spent decades navigating the polite, coded language of contract law, and they had just walked blindly into a family minefield without a map. I could see the calculation happening behind their eyes, the realization that their financial rescue was now entangled with a personal history they knew nothing about. Calvin was the first to move. He always was. He was a creature of momentum, unable to sit still in the face of a loss. He smoothed his tie, a reflex of regained composure, and the look of shock on his face hardened into something defensive, something ugly. "So," Calvin said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to be intimate but sounded accusatory. "This is what this is about." He looked at his partners and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Gentlemen, I apologize. It seems we are not here to discuss business. We are here to participate in a therapy session." "We are discussing business," I said, my voice remaining at absolute zero. "We are discussing a business that is failing." "No," Calvin snapped, pointing a finger at the spreadsheet I had closed. "You are not looking at the business. You are looking at the name on the letterhead. You are letting your feelings interfere with your fiduciary duty. Aurora Sanders, you are tanking this deal because you have a chip on your shoulder." He leaned back, crossing his arms, looking satisfied with his own logic. It was his classic move, when cornered by facts, attack the character of the witness, if he could paint me as an emotional, irrational daughter acting out of spite. He could dismiss the reality of his own incompetence. "You are rejecting us because you are angry," he said. "You are angry that I didn't come to your graduation. You are angry that I didn't coddle you. And now you have a little bit of power, and you want to flex it. It is petty. Aurora Sanders. Frankly, it is beneath you." I looked at him. I really looked at him. For years, I had feared this man. I had craved his approval like a drug. But now, sitting in this glass room, surrounded by the empire I had helped build, he looked small. He looked like a man trying to pay a mortgage with nostalgia. "Let us review the record," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean forward. I listed the facts with the rhythmic cadence of a closing argument, each point a nail in the coffin of his argument. "Exhibit A," I said. "You told a room full of your peers that I would end up in small claims court because I was too soft. That was not a parenting strategy. Calvin, that was a professional assessment, and it was wrong." Mercer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Exhibit B," I continued. "You dismissed my appointment to partner at Westbridge as luck. You told my mother that affirmative action and gender quotas were the only reason I was sitting in this chair. That was not a personal slight. That was a refusal to acknowledge market reality." Calvin opened his mouth to interrupt, but I did not stop. "Exhibit C. You have not called me in 7 years. You did not reach out when I was named one of the top 50 litigators in the state. You did not reach out when I won the fan-out merger case. You are only sitting in this room, calling me by my name, because your credit line is tapped out and your partners are looking for an exit strategy. I placed my hands flat on the table. This is not personal, I said. This is a performance review, and you have failed. The room went quiet again. The air conditioner hummed. A low drone that underscored the tension. Calvin looked at his partners, looking for an ally, but they were studying the grain of the walnut table as if it contained the secrets of the universe. They knew I was right. They had seen the numbers. They knew that if my last name had been Smith or Jones, the rejection would have been identical. Calvin's face changed. The aggression drained away, replaced by a sudden, calculated softness. He slumped slightly in his chair, adopting the posture of a weary patriarch. He looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "Aurora Sanders," he said, his voice gentle now. "Look, I know I was hard on you. I pushed you. Maybe I pushed too hard, but I did it because I wanted you to be tough. I wanted you to be ready for this world. If I was distant, it was only to make you independent." He reached a hand across the table, palm up, a peace offering. "I am sorry if I hurt you," he said. "Truly, but we are family, and right now, your family needs you. Don't punish the firm for my mistakes. Don't punish Arthur and Julian. We can work this out. We can structure this so you have oversight. Just don't close the door." I looked at his hand. It was manicured, shaking slightly. It was a masterclass in manipulation, the timing, the tone, the appeal to shared history. If I were the 22-year-old girl who drove away from that steakhouse in tears, it might have worked. I might have taken that hand. I might have believed that this was a breakthrough, that he was finally seeing me, but I was not that girl. I was a managing partner who negotiated hostage situations for corporations. I knew the difference between an apology and a negotiation tactic. An apology costs you something. This cost him nothing. He was only sorry because he had no other cards to play. He was cornered. So he was trying to barter with a currency he thought I still valued, his affection. I did not take his hand. "The answer is still no," I said. Calvin's hand hovered in the air for a moment, then dropped back to the table. The warmth vanished from his eyes instantly, replaced by the cold, hard flint of a man who realized the hustle had failed. "If anything changes," I said, standing up and gathering my files, "it will be because the numbers change. It will be because you find a way to stop the bleeding, not because you offered a profound realization in a conference room. Fix your balance sheet, Calvin, then we can talk." I turned to Mercer and Rowe. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming in." I walked to the door. I did not look back. I could feel Calvin's eyes boring into my back, a laser of resentment and disbelief. But I kept walking. The glass door slid shut behind me, sealing them in the fishbowl. I walked down the hallway. My stride was long and purposeful. I passed the associate's bullpen, where 20 young lawyers were frantically typing, unaware of the drama that had just played out a few yards away. I nodded to a junior partner who greeted me. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I made it to my office. I closed the door. I locked it. And then I stopped breathing. I moved to the window, bracing my hands against the sill. The trembling started in my fingertips and shot up my arms like an electric current. It was not sorrow. It was not grief. I was not going to cry. I had cried enough over Calvin Hale to fill an ocean, and I was done with that. This was rage. It was a white-hot, vibrating anger that felt like it was going to burn through my skin. It was the anger of realizing that even now, even when he was begging, he still thought he could manipulate me. He still thought I was a puzzle he could solve with the right combination of bullying and fake sentiment. He did not respect my position. He did not respect my skill. He just wanted to use them. He had not seen a managing partner. He had seen a rebellious child who needed to be brought back into the fold. My hands shook so hard that my knuckles tapped against the glass. I took a deep breath, holding it for 4 counts, then exhaling for 4. The box, breathing technique. It was something I learned during my first year as a partner to manage panic attacks. In 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. The trembling subsided. The heat in my chest cooled into something solid and hard. He thought this was over. He thought I had rejected him, and that was the end of it. He would go back to his office, curse my name to his partners, and try to find another lifeline. But he was wrong. This was not over. Because in that meeting, I had seen something. I walked back to my desk and hit the intercom button. "Sarah," I said. My voice was steady again. "Get Robert Vance on the line, and then get the head of our forensic accounting unit." "Yes, Aurora Sanders," Sarah replied. "Is the meeting finished?" "The meeting is finished. The work is just starting." 2 minutes later, Robert Vance walked into my office. Robert was the senior equity partner, the man who had hired me, mentored me, and shielded me from the internal politics until I was strong enough to fight them myself. He was 65, with a face like a crumpled map and eyes that missed nothing. He closed the door and sat down without being asked. "I heard the hail pitch lasted less than 20 minutes, Robert said. "That is a new record, even for you." "It was inefficient to continue," I said. "Their proposal was garbage." "I assume there were complications?" Robert asked. He knew about my father. He was one of the few people who did. "He tried to make it personal," I admitted. "He tried to leverage the relationship. And you?" "I stuck to the financials," Robert nodded. But he was watching me closely. "Aurora Sanders, look, I trust your judgment more than anyone in this firm, but the committee is going to ask questions. Hale, Mercer, and Rowe is a legacy brand. If we let them fail, and it comes out that we had a chance to save them and passed because of family baggage, it could look bad. The firm wants the market expansion. They want that client list. They do not want the family drama." "The client list is a myth," I said sharply. "Vanguard is gone. Their insurance carriers are leaving. The expansion is a mirage." "Okay," Robert said. "But be careful. If you engage with them further, you need to be bulletproof. If you go after him, it has to be business. If it smells like revenge, the board will sideline you." "I am not going after him," I said. "I am doing my job, which brings me to my next request." I looked at the notes I had taken during the meeting. "I want a Phase 2 due diligence," I said. "But I want it to go deeper. I don't just want the tax returns. I want the partner compensation agreements. I want the ethical complaint logs for the last 10 years. I want to know about every settlement they have paid out under a non-disclosure agreement." Robert raised an eyebrow. "That is invasive. That is hostile takeover territory." "They came to us," I reminded him. "They opened their books. I'm just reading the footnotes." "What are you looking for?" "I am looking for the rot," I said. "I saw something in there. Robert, a settlement paid to a paralegal listed as office expenses, $150,000, hidden in the general ledger." Robert's expression darkened. "That is fraud, or at least gross misrepresentation." "Exactly," I said. "And if there is one, there are more." Calvin denied it. Of course, he blamed it on a nuisance suit, but he looked terrified. I stood up and paced behind my desk. "I am going to authorize a forensic audit," I said. "If we are going to touch this firm, even with a 10-foot pole, I need to know exactly what diseases they are carrying. I am not going to let Westbridge inherit a class action lawsuit because my father decided to cover up for his partners." Robert stood up. "All right, I will sign off on the resources, but Aurora Sanders, make me a promise." "What?" "Do this like a surgeon," Robert said. "Clean cuts, no emotion. If you find cancer, you cut it out, but don't hack at the body just because you want to see it bleed." I looked at the skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gray. "I promise," I said. "I will be precise." Robert left. I sat alone in the silence. A surgeon. Yes, that was the role. A surgeon does not hate the patient. A surgeon does not hate the tumor. A surgeon simply removes the impediment to survival. But as I pulled up the file on my computer and began to draft the engagement letter for the auditors, I knew that was not entirely true. I was going to take his firm apart. I was going to turn over every stone, open every closet, and shine a light into every dark corner he had tried to keep hidden. I was going to find every mistake, every lie, every shortcut he had ever taken, and I was going to put it all on paper. I was going to bind it in a report, and I was going to make him sign it. I typed the command to the external investigative team. Subject: Enhanced Due Diligence. Hale, Mercer, Rowe, Priority, Urgent, Scope, Total. I hit send. The trembling in my hands was gone, my heartbeat was slow and steady, the aftershock had passed, and the ground had settled. He wanted a real lawyer? He was about to get one. I would save his people. I would save the innocent associates who were working late nights for a failing company. I would save the clients who were being billed for services they weren't receiving. But to do that, I had to destroy the illusion he had built his life on. I picked up my pen and crossed Calvin's name off the list of potential assets. He was not an asset. He was a liability. And in my firm, liabilities were liquidated. The data dump from Hale, Mercer, and Rowe arrived 48 hours after I issued the order. It did not come in a physical box this time. It arrived as a secure server link, a terabyte of digital confessions waiting to be decrypted. I assembled a team of 4. I did not pick them for their seniority. I picked them for their cynicism. I wanted people who looked at a balance sheet and assumed fraud until proven innocent. We took over a secure war room on the 44th floor. A windowless box designed for sensitive mergers where the air was recycled and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. We are looking for the narrative, I told them as we projected the file structure onto the main screen. The financials tell you what they want you to see. I want to know what they are trying to hide. Look for anomalies in the email metadata. Look for files that were deleted and then restored. Look for the gaps. For the first 6 hours, we found exactly what I expected, the obvious rot. The firm was hemorrhaging money. It was not just a slow leak. It was an arterial spray. They were spending $40,000 a month on client entertainment, while their revenue was dropping by 14% quarter over quarter. They were leasing a corporate jet for client development that, according to the flight logs, had made 12 trips to a resort town in Aspen where no clients resided, but where Calvin Hale owned a vacation home. Standard executive waste, Ben, my lead forensic accountant, muttered, scrolling through the expenses. Arrogant, but not illegal, just bad management. Keep digging, I said. You don't panic pitch a merger to a rival firm because you spent too much on private jets. You do it because something is about to break. It was around 2 a.m. when the tone of the room changed. Ben flagged a personnel file. Aurora Sanders. Look at the C-suite turnover. I walked over to his station. On the screen was a timeline of the firm's executive leadership. They have had 3 chief financial officers in the last 2 years, Ben said, pointing to the dates. The first one, a guy named Henderson, was there for 20 years. He retired abruptly 18 months ago. The replacement lasted 6 months. He resigned for personal reasons. The third one, the current one, was hired 4 months ago. He is 28 years old. 28? I asked. For a firm that size? He is a glorified bookkeeper, Ben said. He doesn't have the experience to push back on the partners. They hired a rubber stamp. Why did the second guy leave? I asked. 6 months is nothing. You don't leave a partnership track job in 6 months unless the building is on fire. I pulled his exit interview. A junior analyst named Sarah piped up from the corner. It is redacted heavily, but there is a note here from HR. He refused to sign the quarterly certification of assets. He cited irregularities in revenue recognition. He wouldn't sign, I whispered. That was the first crack in the foundation. A CFO who refuses to sign off on the books is the corporate equivalent of a canary dropping dead in a coal mine. It meant the numbers we were looking at were not just optimistic. They were fiction. Pull the billing records, I ordered. Cross-reference their biggest clients with their billed hours. If the revenue is fake, Where are they hiding the gap? An hour later, we found the discounts. It was pathetic, to keep their remaining clients from fleeing. Hale, Mercer, and Rowe had been offering massive, off-the-books write-downs. On the surface, the invoices looked standard: $500 an hour for a partner, $300 for an associate. But in the credits and adjustments column, there were massive slashes. They were giving a 40% discount to a regional bank just to keep the account active. They were writing off $50,000 of work for a construction firm as a goodwill gesture. They are buying revenue, Ben said, shaking his head. They are doing the work for cost, maybe less, just to keep the top-line revenue number looking high enough to satisfy their bank covenants. If the bank knew their effective hourly rate was this low, they would call the loans immediately. It is a Ponzi scheme of billable hours, I said. They are working twice as hard to make half as much, hoping a miracle saves them before the cash runs out. But incompetence was one thing. I was looking for the liability. I was looking for the thing that would stick to Westbridge and Crow if we bought them. I found something, Sarah said. Her voice was different this time, quieter. In the archived email server, it looks like a draft folder from a partner who left last year. He didn't purge his outbox. I moved to her screen. It was an email chain with the general counsel of a pharmaceutical company called Oakhaven Labs. Oakhaven had been a major client for my father's firm for a decade. They had left abruptly 6 months ago. The subject line was, "Final demand regarding document preservation." I read the text. My stomach turned over. Dear Calvin, the email read, "We have reason to believe that during the discovery phase of the class action suit, sensitive internal memos regarding the side effects of our beta blocker were not merely withheld, but destroyed. Our internal audit shows these documents were sent to your firm on March 15th. They were never produced to the court, and they are now missing from your secure server. If this surfaces, it is not just malpractice, it is spoliation of evidence. We are terminating representation immediately. If you sue us for unpaid fees, we will go to the Bar Association." I stared at the screen. The room felt very cold. "Spoliation," I said softly. "That is disbarment. That is criminal." "There is no reply from Calvin in the chain," Sarah said. "But look who handled the risk assessment on the Oakhaven file." She clicked a hyperlink, opening a PDF of the internal case management summary. At the bottom of the page, where the supervising partner is supposed to sign off on compliance and document integrity, there was a signature. It was scrawled, hasty, but unmistakable. I had seen it on birthday cards and sarcastic notes for 20 years. Evan Hale. "Evan?" I asked. "Evan is a junior partner. He doesn't have the authority to sign off on risk for a major pharmaceutical case. That requires a senior equity partner." "Look at the date," Ben said, pointing to the corner of the document. "This was signed 6 months ago, just before the client fired them." I scrolled through the other files. It was a pattern. Evan's signature was everywhere. He was signing off on conflict checks. He was signing off on trust account audits. He was authorizing settlements that were just below the threshold that required a full committee vote. He is playing managing partner, I realized. He is bypassing the controls. Does Calvin know? "He has to," Ben argued. "Calvin is the lead on these accounts. He has to see the signatures. Unless Calvin is letting him do it," I said. "Unless Calvin is setting him up." I paced the small room. The pieces were shifting. I had assumed my father was a tyrant, a man who controlled every aspect of his kingdom. But tyrants don't let their idiot sons sign federal compliance documents unless they have checked out, or unless they need a scapegoat. "There is one more thing," Sarah said. She looked hesitant. "The compliance reports, the ones they submit to their insurance carrier to renew their malpractice coverage. What about them?" "They are too perfect," Sarah said. "Statistically impossible. Every law firm has errors, missed deadlines, filing mistakes. It is normal. You report them. Your premium goes up a little. You move on. But for the last 18 months, Hale, Mercer, and Rowe has reported 0 incidents. 0. "That is impossible," I said. "With the turnover they have had?" With the chaos in the billing department? Exactly, Sarah said. Someone is scrubbing the error logs before they go to the insurer. That is insurance fraud. Aurora Sanders, if the carrier finds out, they will void the policy retroactively. If a claim comes in, like, say, from Oakhaven Labs about destroyed documents, the firm will have no coverage. They will be naked. I leaned back against the wall, crossing my arms. The picture was complete, and it was horrific. Hale, Mercer, and Rowe was not just a failing business. It was a radioactive containment zone. They had committed insurance fraud. They had likely destroyed evidence in a federal case. They were artificially inflating revenue to defraud their lenders. And at the center of it was my brother, Evan, signing his name to the wreckage, acting like a king while the castle burned down around him. And then I saw the trap. The merger, I said. The partnership with Westbridge. It's a life raft, Ben said. No, I corrected him. It's a laundromat. If Westbridge and Crow acquired them, we would inherit their assets, yes, but we would also inherit their liabilities in a stock-for-stock merger, which is what they proposed. The entities blend. If we signed that deal, the moment the ink was dry, their insurance fraud would become our insurance fraud. Their spoliation of evidence would become our spoliation. They want to use our credibility, I said, my voice hardening. They know the Oakhaven bomb is going to go off. They know the bank is going to audit the books. If they are alone, they go to prison. But if they are part of Westbridge, we have the capital to settle the suits. We have the political connections to make the investigations go away. They aren't asking for a partnership. They are asking for a human shield. And specifically, they were asking me. Calvin knew I was the one reviewing the deal. He knew I was the girl who follows the rules. He probably thought I would look at the top-line numbers, see the synergy, and sign off out of some misguided desire to help the family or prove I was a big shot. If I had signed that deal, and the Oakhaven letter came out 6 months later, it would have been my signature on the acquisition. I would have been the managing partner who failed to catch the fraud. It would not just destroy Westbridge's reputation, it would end my career. I would be the woman who bought her father's crimes and tainted her own firm. He tried to kill me, I whispered. What? Ben asked. Not physically, I said. Professionally. He was willing to let me hold the bag. He was willing to let his soft daughter take the fall for his son's incompetence and his own negligence. I looked at the screen. At the digital evidence of their betrayal, I should have been terrified. Any other lawyer would be drafting a rejection letter and sprinting to the nearest exit. I should be calling the police. But as I stared at Evan's shaky signature and the draft letter from Oakhaven, I felt something else. I felt the shift, the balance of power, which had been tilted against me since I was 9 years old, suddenly swung violently in my favor. They were not just failing, they were criminals, and I held the evidence. Download everything, I ordered. Make 3 copies, encrypt them, 1 goes to the cloud, 1 goes to a physical drive in my safe, 1 goes to the vault. What are we going to do? Sarah asked. Are we going to report them? I turned to look at her. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just realized the trap had snapped shut. Report them? I asked. No, that is too easy. If we report them, they just go to jail. The firm collapses. The innocent staff lose their jobs. The clients get hurt. I walked back to the table and picked up the printed copy of the Oakhaven letter. We are not going to report them, I said. We are going to own them. I looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. Draft a new term sheet, I told Ben. Forget the partnership. Forget the merger. I want an asset purchase agreement. We are going to buy the furniture, the client files, and the associate contracts, but we are leaving the liability shell behind. They will never agree to that, Ben said. That leaves the partners personally liable for the debt and the fraud. It bankrupts Calvin and Evan personally. I know, I said. That is why they are going to agree to it. Why? Because I'm going to show them this file. I tapped the screen. And I am going to give them a choice. They can sell to me on my terms, and I will bury this deep enough that they might stay out of prison. Or they can say no, and I will forward this email to the Bar Association myself. I looked at the skyline again. The city was still dark, but I could see the faint purple line of dawn on the horizon. My father wanted a shark, I said. He wanted someone who wasn't afraid of the blood. Well, he got one. I turned back to the team. Get some sleep, I said. We have a meeting on Saturday, and this time, I am not going to be 8 minutes late. I am going to be early. I walked out of the war room, clutching the drive with the evidence in my hand. It was light as a feather, but it weighed enough to crush a dynasty. I finally understood why he had sent the application. He wasn't just desperate for money. He was desperate for a burying ground. He thought he could bury his sins in my backyard because I was too sentimental to dig them up. He forgot that he was the one who taught me to dig. He forgot that he was the one who taught me that feelings are a liability, and facts are the only things that matter. I had the facts, and on Saturday, I was going to use them to break him, not with a shout, but with a whisper. Sign here, Dad, or go to jail. The thought was clinical, precise, and absolutely necessary. I was going to perform the surgery. I was going to cut the cancer out. And if the patient screamed, well, clients don't wait, and neither does justice. Saturday morning in the financial district was a different kind of quiet. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a machine that had briefly paused to cool down. The air conditioning vents hummed with a lower frequency, and the light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my 44th floor office was harsh and unfiltered, illuminating dust motes that usually went unnoticed during the frantic energy of the work week. I had called Calvin on Friday night. I did not ask him if he was free. I told him to be here at 10 o'clock. I told him to come alone, no partners, no associates, no counsel. Is this the signing? He had asked. His voice thick with a hope that was painful to hear. It is a discussion about terms, I had replied, and then I hung up before he could ask anything else. Now, it was 10 o'clock exactly. My assistant was not here. The reception desk was empty. I had sent a security code to Calvin's phone so he could bypass the lobby guards. I wanted him to walk through the empty corridors of Westbridge and Crow alone. I wanted him to see the scale of it without the distraction of people. I wanted him to see the marble floors, the modern art collection, the row of conference rooms that stretched like a city block. I wanted him to feel the weight of the institution I commanded. When he appeared in my doorway, he looked smaller than he had on Tuesday, without his entourage of nodding partners, without the performative stage of a pitch meeting. He was just a man in a weekend suit, a navy blazer and khakis that looked slightly dated. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were bruising, and there was a tremor in his hand as he reached up to adjust his glasses. "Aurora Sanders," he said, stepping into the room. He looked around, taking in the minimalist furniture, the view of the harbor, the complete lack of personal clutter. There were no photos of family on my desk, just a computer, a phone, and a single, thin document. "Sit down," I said. I did not stand up to greet him. I remained seated behind my desk, creating a deliberate barrier. He sat in the client chair. It was a comfortable chair, designed to make people feel safe while we billed them $800 an hour. "I assume we are finalizing the partnership agreement," Calvin said, trying to summon his old bluster. "I spoke to Mercer. He is ready to draft the press release. We were thinking something about combining legacies as the headline." "There is no partnership," I said. The silence that followed was instant and brittle. Calvin froze, his smile halfway formed. "I beg your pardon?" "There is no merger," I continued, my voice level and unhurried. "There is no combining of legacies. Westbridge and Crow will not be partnering with Hale. Mercer and Rowe." Calvin's face flushed. "You brought me here on a Saturday to reject me again? You could have done this over the phone. Aurora Sanders, this is vindictive. I did not bring you here to reject you," I said. "I brought you here to offer you a lifeline. but it is not the one you asked for. I placed my hand on the document in front of me. I slid it across the mahogany desk. It traveled the 3 feet between us with a soft hiss of paper on wood. "Read it." Calvin looked at the document. He looked at me. Then he put on his reading glasses and looked at the cover page. Asset Purchase Agreement. He frowned. He flipped the page. He began to read the definitions section. I watched his eyes dart back and forth. I watched the confusion turn into realization, and the realization turn into shock. "This," he stammered, "this isn't a merger. This is a liquidation. It is an acquisition of select assets," I corrected him. "Westbridge and Crow is offering to purchase the employment contracts of 40 specific associates. We are offering to purchase the client files for your litigation and tax practices, subject to client consent, and we are offering to buy your physical office leases, which we will likely terminate." "You are cherry-picking," Calvin said, his voice rising. "You are taking the talent and the clients, and you are leaving—" "What?" "We are leaving the entity," I said. "We are leaving Hale, Mercer, and Rowe behind. We are leaving the partnership structure. And most importantly, we are leaving the liabilities." I leaned forward. "This structure allows us to onboard your revenue-generating staff and save their jobs. It allows us to service your clients who are currently being neglected. But the legal entity, the firm itself, remains yours, along with its debts, along with its lease obligations, and along with its malpractice exposure." Calvin dropped the document as if it were burning his fingers. "You can't do that," he whispered. "If you take the assets and leave the shell collapses. The firm declares bankruptcy." "Yes," I said. "It does." "And the partners?" he asked. "Mercer? Rowe? Me? We have personal guarantees on those lines of credit. If the firm goes under, the bank comes for us. They come for our houses. They come for our pensions." "I know," I said. "You are bankrupting me," he said, staring at me with horror. "You are sitting there, in your custom suit, telling me that you are going to strip my company for parts and leave me to die on the side of the road." "I am giving you a way to settle your debts," I said. "Look at Section 4, Paragraph 3. He looked down, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. "The purchase price," I said. "We are offering $12 million for the assets. That is a fair market valuation. In fact, it is generous." "$12 million?" he scoffed. "The brand alone is worth 20. "The brand is worth 0, I said sharply. "Actually, the brand is worth negative equity because of the reputation damage you are currently sustaining. But the $12 million is cash. You can use that cash to pay off the bank loans. You can use it to buy out your lease. It allows you to wind down the firm with dignity, pay your creditors, and retire." "Retire?" He spat the word out. "I am not ready to retire. This is my firm. Aurora Sanders. My name is on the door. My father's name was on the door. And now it is going to come off," I said. Calvin stood up. He walked to the window, turning his back to me. He looked out at the city he used to think he owned. I let him stand there. I gave him a moment to mourn the ego death that was happening in real time. He turned back to me. His face was pale, his lips compressed into a thin line. "Is this revenge?" he asked. It was the question I knew was coming. It was the only framework he had for understanding why someone would strip him of his power. In his mind, I was the spurned daughter lashing out. "You asked me that on Tuesday," I said. "I told you it was about numbers." "Don't give me that corporate speak," he snapped. "This is personal. You want to humiliate me. You want to destroy the thing I loved more than—" He stopped himself. "More than you loved me?" I finished the sentence for him. My voice was not sad. It was just factual. He didn't answer. "It is not revenge, Calvin," I said. "It is quarantine." I opened my laptop. I turned the screen so he could see it. I didn't open the Oak Haven letter yet. I just opened the folder structure. I found the rot, I said. Calvin went still. I know about the discounts, I said. I know about the 2 CFOs who left because they wouldn't sign the books. I know about the $150,000 settlement paid to the paralegal, hidden under office supplies. Calvin opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. And, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room like a gunshot, I know about Oakhaven Labs. The color drained from his face completely. He looked like he had been struck physically. He grabbed the back of the client chair to steady himself. I don't know what you are talking about, he croaked. I have the draft letter, I said. The one from their general counsel. The one alleging spoliation of evidence. The one alleging that documents regarding beta blocker side effects were destroyed on your watch. I watched his eyes. I saw the terror there. He knew. Of course he knew. That was a misunderstanding, he stammered. Evan handled that discovery. I know Evan handled it, I said. I saw his signature on the risk assessment. I saw his signature on the compliance logs that you sent to your insurance carrier, logs that claimed 0 incidents, which constitutes insurance fraud. I stood up then. I walked around the desk and stood in front of him. This is not revenge, I repeated. This is risk management. If I sign a merger agreement with you, Westbridge inherits that liability. Westbridge becomes the defendant in the Oakhaven lawsuit. Westbridge becomes the party investigated by the Bar Association for destroying evidence, and I become the managing partner who let a toxic asset poison her firm. I pointed at the document on the desk. This asset purchase creates a firewall. We take the people, we take the clean clients, we leave the fraud, the lawsuits, and the regulatory nightmare behind in the old entity. The $12 million gives you the cash to settle with Oakhaven quietly before they go public. It gives you a chance to clean up Evan's mess without going to prison. Calvin sat down heavily. He looked at the floor. He looked at his hands. Evan, he whispered. He told me he took care of it. He told me the documents were just misplaced. Evan lied, I said. And you let him lie because you were too busy trying to keep the lights on to ask questions. You let him play lawyer because you were desperate. Calvin looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He's your brother, Aurora Sanders. He is a liability, I said. And right now, so are you. I tapped the contract. This is the only deal on the table. There is no negotiation. There is no counteroffer. You sign this, or I walk away. And if I walk away, I have a fiduciary duty to report the insurance irregularities I found during due diligence. It was a bluff. Mostly. Reporting him would be complicated, but he didn't know that. He just knew that I held his life in my hands. If I sign this, he said, his voice trembling, Hale, Mercer, and Rowe ceases to exist. Yes. And what happens to me? Turn to the last page, I said. Addendum A. He flipped to the back. Consulting agreement. We will bring you over, I said. Not as a partner, not as a shareholder. As of counsel, a senior consultant. He read the terms. Reporting to the managing partner of acquisitions. He looked up. I report to you. Yes, I said. You report to me. I can't do that, he said, shaking his head. I can't work for my daughter. I can't walk into this building every day and have people know that I answer to you. Why? I asked. Because it hurts your pride? Or because you don't think I'm qualified? It's not about qualification, he said. It's about respect. I am your father. And I am the one saving you from indictment, I said. I leaned back against my desk, crossing my ankles. Here is the reality. Dad, you have 2 choices. Choice A. You keep your pride, you walk out of here, you refuse the deal. Next week, Oakhaven files their suit. The bank calls your loan. The insurance carrier voids your policy. You lose the house. You lose the vacation home. You and Evan probably lose your licenses to practice law. But hey, at least you didn't have to report to a girl. I paused. Choice B. You swallow your ego. You sign the paper. You take the $12 million. You pay off the debts. You come to work here. You keep your office. albeit a smaller one. You keep your salary. You get to tell the world that you orchestrated a brilliant exit strategy to a global firm. You save your reputation. You save your partners. But in exchange, you answer to me. And when I tell you to jump, you don't ask how high. You ask if you should do it in heels or flats. The room was silent again. The dust motes danced in the light. Calvin looked at the contract. He looked at the pen lying next to it. It was a Mont Blanc. I had bought it for myself when I made partner. "What about Evan?" he asked quietly. "Evan is not part of the deal," I said. "He needs a job. Evan is a risk I am not willing to import," I said. "The asset purchase includes key personnel. Evan is not key. He is dangerous. He is out." "He will be destroyed," Calvin said. "He is already destroyed," I said. "He just hasn't hit the ground yet. You can support him with your payout if you want. But he does not step foot in Westbridge and Crow." Calvin looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He was seeing it now. He was finally seeing the thing he had claimed to want all those years ago. He was seeing the killer instinct. He was seeing the hardness. "You have become," he trailed off. "I have become exactly what you told me to be." I said, "I am winning." Calvin picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. "I never thought it would end like this," he murmured. "I thought I would pass the torch. I didn't think it would be taken." "You dropped the torch, Dad," I said softly. "I picked it up before it burned the house down." He hesitated. He looked at the clause that detailed his reporting structure. Calvin Hale, Senior Consultant, reports directly to Aurora Sanders Hale, Managing Partner. He took a deep breath, a shuddering intake of air that sounded like a sob. "You can keep control," I said, repeating the ultimatum. "Or you can keep your people. Pick one." He looked at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The judgment was gone. There was only resignation. He lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. "Where do I sign?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Line 4, I said. "Press hard. It's a carbon copy." He signed. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a dynasty ending. It was the sound of a 100-year-old name being erased. He finished and capped the pen. He pushed the document back to me. "Done," he said. "Thank you," I said. I picked up the document and checked the signature. It was valid. "I will have the escrow instructions sent to your personal attorney on Monday," I said. "We will announce the acquisition on Wednesday. Until then, this stays quiet." "Understood," he said. He stood up. He looked lost. He looked like an old man who didn't know where the exit was. "Calvin," I said. He turned back. "Don't be late on Monday," I said. "We have an onboarding meeting at 8:30. He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't make a joke. He just nodded and walked out of the room. I watched him go. I watched the door close. I was alone in the silence again. I looked at the signature. I had won. I had saved the innocent. I had neutralized the threat. I had brought my father to heel. But as I looked at the ink drying on the page, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, hollow clarity. I was a real lawyer. I had the contract to prove it. And it had only cost me everything I used to feel. My phone rang at 9:45 on Sunday night. I was in my apartment, a glass box suspended over the city that I used mostly for sleeping and storing suits. I was reviewing the transition plan for the associates we were about to acquire, highlighting the names of the ones worth saving and the ones who would need to be let go. The caller ID flashed a name I had not seen on my phone screen in years. Evan Hale. I stared at it. The phone vibrated against the marble countertop of my kitchen island, a low, persistent buzz that sounded like a warning. I let it ring 3 times. I took a sip of water. Then, I swiped to answer and put it on speaker. "This is Aurora Sanders," I said. "Rory?" Evan's voice came through, loud and overly familiar, using the childhood nickname I had buried a decade ago. He sounded energized, the way he always did when he thought he was about to close a deal. I didn't think you would pick up, big bad managing partner, working on the Lord's Day. What do you want, Evan? I asked. I did not move from the island. I did not sit down. We need to talk, he said. About the transition. Dad told me you two had a productive meeting yesterday. He was vague on the details. Said he is waiting for the lawyers to paper it up. But I know the broad strokes. You are buying us out. We are acquiring assets, I corrected him. Semantics, Evan scoffed. Look, I know how these things go. Dad is old school. He thinks he can just sign a piece of paper and the firm will fall in line. But you and I know the reality. The junior partners? The associates? They listen to me. I am the one in the trenches with them. If you want this deal to go through smoothly, if you want to avoid a mutiny during the client handover, you need me on board. I said nothing. I looked at the city lights. This was the opening gambit. He was trying to establish leverage where he had none. He assumed he was part of the package. He assumed that because his last name was Hale, his seat at the table was guaranteed. I am listening, I said finally. I want to discuss my compensation package, Evan said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. And my title. I am not coming over as a junior partner. Rory, I have been running the day-to-day at Hale. Mercer for 2 years while Dad has been decomposing. I expect full equity partnership at Westbridge, and I want a seat on the steering committee. Full equity, I repeated. That is a steep ask for a firm in your financial position. My financial position is temporary, Evan said quickly. The market is bouncing back, and frankly, you owe me this. You owe the family. You left, remember? You walked out and left me to deal with Dad's ego and his decline. I carried this firm while you were off playing corporate shark. Now that you are back, don't think you can just sideline me. I felt a cold prickle of amusement. He actually believed this. He believed he was the martyr. Is that all? I asked. No, Evan said. There is also the matter of the vote. You need 75% of the partnership to approve an asset sale. I control about 30% of the voting block. The younger guys trust me. If I tell them this deal is a hostile takeover, they will vote no. If I tell them it is a golden opportunity, they sign. I am the kingmaker here. Aurora Sanders. I am just making sure you know the price of the crown. I stayed quiet. This was the tactic I used in depositions. People hate silence. They feel a compulsion to fill it. And usually, they fill it with the truth they were trying to hide. I waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Look, Evan said, filling the void just as I predicted. It is not just about the vote. I have options. Aurora Sanders. I have been talking to Kincaid and Lewis. They are very interested in our tech portfolio. If Westbridge lowballs me, I could easily take 4 or 5 key partners and walk across the street to Kincaid. You would be buying an empty shell. My eyes narrowed. Kincaid and Lewis, the firm that had poached Vanguard. You are shopping the firm, I said, behind Calvin's back. I am exploring strategic alternatives, Evan corrected, his voice slick. Dad is... Look, I love the guy, but he is past it. He is making bad calls. He is emotional. He thinks he can save everything. I am a realist. I am doing what needs to be done to save the business. Honestly, you should be thanking me. I am the only reason there is anything left to buy. As he spoke, a notification pinged on my laptop. It was an email from Ben, the head of my forensic team. The subject line was simply, "You need to see this, now." I tapped the trackpad to open it while Evan continued to ramble about his value add. It was a forwarded email chain. Ben had found it in the recovered data from the server, likely from a deleted items folder that Evan thought was secure. The email was dated 3 weeks ago. It was from Evan Hale to the managing partner at Kincaid and Lewis. I read the text, and my blood ran cold. Subject: The Westbridge Leverage. David, I agree with your assessment. My father is not going to sell to you directly. He has too much pride to sell to a local rival, but if I can get him to engage with Westbridge, I can use their due diligence to validate our book of business. Once Westbridge makes an offer, I can leak the terms to you. If you come in 5% higher, I can force a vote of no confidence in my father, take the managing partner role, and bring the firm to you. I just need a guarantee that I come in as head of litigation. Let Aurora Sanders Hale do the heavy lifting of auditing the books, and then we will steal the prize out from under her. Best, Evan. I read it twice. He wasn't just incompetent. He wasn't just arrogant. He was a traitor. He was using me. He was using Westbridge as a stalking horse to drive up his price with a competitor, planning to humiliate both me and his father in a single stroke. He didn't care about saving the firm. He wanted to stage a coup. Aurora Sanders? Evan asked. Are you still there? I am here, I said. My voice sounded different now. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by something sharper. I am just looking at your timeline. Evan, you said you have been talking to Kincaid. Just preliminary chats, he lied. Nothing serious, unless you force my hand. I am looking at an email, I said. From you to David Kincaid, dated January 14th. The line went dead silent. How? Evan started, then stopped. You don't have access to my private emails. I have access to the firm's server, I said. You sent it from your work account, Evan, which was stupid. But then again, you have a history of being careless with documentation, don't you? That email was hypothetical, Evan stammered, his voice pitching up. It was leverage. I was trying to create a market. You called our due diligence heavy lifting that you were going to exploit, I quoted. You planned to use my work to negotiate a better exit for yourself. You were going to stab Calvin in the back and leave me holding the bag. It's business, Evan shouted, the veneer cracking. It's exactly what you would do. Don't act all high and mighty. Aurora Sanders. You haven't spoken to Dad in 7 years, and suddenly you are the dutiful daughter saving the legacy? Please, you are here to strip mine us. I was just trying to get a parachute before you crashed the plane. I am not crashing the plane, I said. I am landing it, and you are not on the passenger list. What is that supposed to mean? It means there is no partnership for you, I said. There is no equity. There is no job. The asset purchase agreement specifically excludes you. Evan, we are taking the associates. We are taking the staff. We are taking Calvin. But we are not taking you. I heard a sharp intake of breath. You can't do that, he said. Dad wouldn't agree to that. He wouldn't cut me out. He already did, I said. He signed the papers yesterday. You are out, Evan. You are unemployed. You bitch, he hissed. The word hung in the air, ugly and desperate. You manipulated him. You probably threatened him. You think you can just discard me? I am a Hale. That firm is my birthright. The firm is a crime scene, I said calmly, and your fingerprints are all over it. If you cut me out, Evan said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, I will burn you down. I know people in the press. Aurora Sanders. I will leak the story. Ruthless managing partner humiliates her own father and brother to settle a childhood grudge. I will paint you as a monster. I will tell them you forced a senile old man to sign away his legacy under duress. I will make you radioactive. Westbridge will fire you just to get away from the stink. Is that your play? I asked. Publicity? It is a promise, Evan said. Give me the partnership, or I go to the journals tomorrow morning. I will destroy your reputation. Aurora Sanders. I will make sure no client ever trusts you again. I walked over to the window. I looked at the reflection of my own face in the glass. I looked calm. I looked bored. Go ahead, I said. What? Call the journals, I said. Call the Times. Call the Wall Street Journal. Tell them everything. But before you dial, Evan, I want you to remember one name. I paused. Oakhaven Labs. The silence on the other end was heavy. It was the silence of a man who had just heard the click of a landmine under his foot. I don't know what you mean, he whispered. I have the risk assessment, Evan. I said. The one you signed, the one where you certified that document retention policies were followed. And I have the draft letter from Oakhaven's general counsel alleging spoliation of evidence regarding beta blocker side effects. I let that sink in. And, I continued, I have the compliance logs you submitted to the malpractice carrier, the ones where you reported 0 incidents to keep the premiums low. That is insurance fraud. Evan, that is a federal crime. It carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. You can't prove I knew. I can prove you signed it, I said. You were the acting partner on the file. You signed the checks. You signed the certifications. You didn't just inherit the mess, Evan. You created it. You destroyed those documents because you thought it would win the case. And when Oakhaven found out, you panicked. Dad knew, Evan screamed. Dad knew about it. Calvin was negligent, I said. But you were active. And here's the difference. Calvin signed a deal that protects him. He is now a consultant for Westbridge and Crow. He has a legal team. You are just a guy with no job, no firm, and a paper trail that leads straight to a jail cell. I took a sip of water. So, here is how this is going to go, I said. You are not going to call the press. You are not going to call Kincaid. You are going to pack your office tonight. You are going to leave your key card on the desk, and you are going to disappear. You can't do this, he sobbed. He was crying now. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving only a scared boy who had been playing dress-up in his father's suit. If you go public, I said, my voice cutting through his tears like a razor. If you say one word about me, or Calvin, or this deal, I will hand that entire file to the district attorney. I will not hesitate. I will not blink. I will send my own brother to prison to protect this firm. Aurora Sanders, please, he begged. I am family. You were the one who wanted to be a real lawyer, I said. This is what it looks like. Evan, real lawyers don't make threats they can't survive. You brought a knife to a nuclear war. What am I supposed to do? He asked. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, I said. Go back to school. Go to Europe. Just go away. Because if I see your name on a legal filing in this state ever again, I will release the file. Dad will never forgive you for this, he said weakly. Dad signed the paper. I reminded him. He chose survival. Maybe you should too. I took the phone away from my ear. I looked at the screen. The call timer was at 8 minutes and 42 seconds. Goodbye, Evan, I said. I hung up. I stood there in the silence of my apartment. My heart was beating a little faster than normal, but my hands were steady. For 30 years, Evan had been the golden boy. He had been the one who could do no wrong, the one whose mediocrity was celebrated as potential. He had bullied me, mocked me, and dismissed me. He had thought that because he was a man, and because he was the favorite, the world would always bend to him. He had never understood that the world does not bend to favorites, it bends to force. I had just broken him. I had stripped him of his career, his legacy, and his future in a single phone call. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the water down the sink. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was just relief. The relief of finally putting down a heavy weight I had been carrying since I was 9 years old. The competition was over. The scoreboard was final. Aurora Sanders. 1, Evan. 0. I went to my laptop and replied to Ben's email. Received. Proceed with the acquisition. The internal threat has been neutralized. I closed the laptop. I had work to do tomorrow. I had a firm to run. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about what my family thought of me, because I owned them. Wednesday morning arrived with the sterile, unforgiving clarity of a fluorescent light bulb flicking on in a dark room. I had scheduled the joint session for 9 o'clock in the main boardroom of Westbridge and Crow. I called it a ratification meeting, a harmless bureaucratic term that suggested rubber stamping and handshakes. It was not a ratification, it was a pressure chamber. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Robert Vance, my senior equity partner, and Eleanor Lynn. a forensic auditor from an external firm I had retained 48 hours prior. On the other side of the mahogany expanse sat the delegation from Hale, Mercer, and Rowe. Calvin sat in the center, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 3 days. To his left were Arthur Mercer and Julian Rowe, looking anxious and hopeful, believing they were minutes away from a rescue. And to his right sat Evan. He had not disappeared. He had not resigned. Despite our phone call, despite the threat of the Oakhaven file, he had shown up wearing a 3-piece suit and a smile that looked painted on. He was betting that I would not detonate the bomb in a room full of witnesses because the explosion would damage my firm too. He was betting on my professional restraint. He was making a mistake. "Let us begin," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Before we finalize the structure of the acquisition, Ms. Lynn needs to review a few discrepancies found during the Phase 2 diligence." Evan leaned forward, clicking a gold pen. "Discrepancies? We went over the numbers with your team last week. Everything is reconciled. This feels like a stalling tactic. Aurora Sanders." "Standard procedure," I said, my voice flat. "Ms. Lynn?" Eleanor Lynn did not look up from her laptop. She was a woman who found emotions inefficient and numbers absolute. "I am looking at the revenue projections for the next fiscal year." "Ms. Lynn said, you have listed the Vanguard Logistics account as a confirmed renewal, valued at $2.5 million. Vanguard is a legacy client," Evan said quickly. "We are in the final stages of renegotiating their retainer. It is a formality. I have an email here," Ms. Lynn said, sliding a printed sheet across the table. "Dated November 12th, from the General Counsel at Vanguard. It explicitly states that they are terminating their relationship with your firm due to, quote, unacceptable delays and lack of strategic oversight, end quote. They have already moved their files to Kincaid and Lewis." Arthur Mercer picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. "Evan, you told us Vanguard was just holding out for a discount. You said the revenue was guaranteed." "It was a negotiation tactic," Evan snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "I can get them back. Once we announce the Westbridge merger, they will come running back. I was projecting based on the post-merger reality." "That is called fraud," Robert Vance said from beside me. His voice was gravelly and low. "Listing terminated contracts as guaranteed revenue to inflate a valuation is securities fraud." "It is optimism," Evan shot back. "And frankly, I resent the implication. We are here to talk about the future, not dig up old emails to score points. Aurora Sanders, we know you have a personal history here, but let us not waste everyone's time trying to humiliate your father." There it was, the pivot. He was trying to frame my due diligence as a daughter's tantrum. He glanced at Calvin, expecting support. Calvin did not look at him. He was staring at the email on the table. "Let us continue," I said. Ms. Lynn turned the page. "I am also seeing a significant variance in the partner compensation pool. According to the partnership agreement, all draws were supposed to be reduced by 20% last year to cover the operating deficit." "We took the cut," Julian Rowe said. "It was painful, but we did it." "You did," Ms. Lynn corrected. "However, the ledger shows that a series of performance bonuses were paid out to a specific junior partner that effectively negated the cut. In fact, this partner earned 10% more than the previous year." She looked up. "Mr. Evan Hale received $340,000 in bonuses while the firm was insolvent." The room went deadly silent. Mercer and Rowe turned to look at Evan. Their expressions were not confused anymore. They were horrified. They had cut their own salaries, missed mortgage payments, and drained their savings to keep the lights on, believing everyone was sharing the pain. "I brought in the business," Evan shouted, his face turning red. "I was the only one bringing in new clients. I deserve those bonuses. It is standard industry practice to reward rainmakers." "You didn't bring in business," I said. "You bought it. You offered 40% discounts to clients like Metrobank just to get them to sign. Then you claimed a bonus on the gross revenue, not the net. You paid yourself for losing money. That is a lie, Evan hissed. You are twisting the data because you want to drive the price down. Dad, tell her. Tell her I earned every cent. Calvin slowly lifted his head. He looked at the ledger Ms. Lynn was holding. He looked at the son he had championed, the son he had protected, the son he had believed was the future of his legacy. I didn't approve those bonuses, Calvin said softly. You signed the checks, Evan said, sweating now. I put them in the stack with the vendor payments. You signed them? I signed them because I trusted you, Calvin said. His voice was gaining strength, but it was brittle, like cracked glass. I didn't check the codes because I thought you were working to save us. I thought we were in this together. We are, Evan pleaded. I did it for us, to keep up appearances. If I looked successful, the firm looked successful. There is one more thing, I interrupted. I did not want this to become a family therapy session. I wanted it to be an autopsy. I signaled to Ms. Lynn. We found an internal memo, Ms. Lynn said. Regarding the transition strategy, it appears that Mr. Evan Hale has been holding private meetings with the junior associates. Arthur Mercer frowned. What meetings? I have a sworn statement from a third-year associate, Ms. Lynn said. She states that Evan Hale told the staff not to worry about the Westbridge takeover because, quote, once the deal is signed, Calvin is being put out to pasture, and I will be running the division. We will purge the old guard and take control, end quote. The heir left the room. It was one thing to steal money. It was another to plot a mutiny against your own partners. Mercer and Rowe looked at Calvin. They looked betrayed. Not just by Evan, but by the chaos Calvin had allowed to fester. You told them I was being put out to pasture? Calvin asked. He sounded stunned. I built this desk you're sitting at. Evan. You are old. Dad? Evan snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The mask was fully off now. Let's be real. You have been losing a step for 5 years. You are sentimental. You are slow. I was trying to position us for the modern market. I was telling the associates what they needed to hear to stay. I was protecting the asset. He turned to me, his eyes wild. And you know it. Aurora Sanders. You know business is Darwinian. The strong survive. I was doing exactly what you would do. No, I said. I do not lie to my partners, and I do not steal from my firm. I stood up. I walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. I picked up a black marker. This is the situation, I said. I wrote 2 numbers on the board, option A and option B. Option A, I said. We proceed with the merger as originally proposed by Evan. Westbridge acquires the entity. We then discover the fraud. We discover the Vanguard lie. We discover the Oakhaven spoliation. Evan flinched when I said Oakhaven. My firm then sues your firm for breach of warranty, I continued. We pierce the corporate veil. We come after your personal assets to recover our losses. The firm goes bankrupt. You all lose your licenses, and you likely face criminal charges. I drew a red line through option A. Option B, I said. The asset purchase. I looked at Mercer and Rowe. Westbridge purchases your client lists and your employment contracts. We hire your staff. We hire you as senior counsel. We pay you $12 million in cash for the tangible assets. $12 million? Mercer asked. But the valuation was 20. The valuation included a reputation that does not exist, I said. $12 million is the cash value of your receivables and furniture. It is enough to pay off your bank loans. It is enough to settle your lease. I looked at Calvin. But here's the condition, I said. The legal entity of Hale, Mercer, and Rowe remains behind. It retains the liabilities. It retains the history. And it retains the partners who are not part of the transition. Meaning what? Rowe asked. Meaning Westbridge takes the practice, I said. We take Calvin. We take Arthur. We take Julian. We take the associates. I pointed the marker at Evan. We do not take Evan. You can't do that, Evan said. laughing nervously. "I am a named partner in the succession plan. You can't just cut me out." "I just did," I said. "The offer is contingent on Evan Hale having no role, no title, and no office at Westbridge and Crow. He does not come over. He stays with the empty shell." "This is insane," Evan shouted. "Dad, tell her. Tell her we are a package deal. If she takes the firm, she takes me." Calvin sat very still. He looked at the son who had forged his signature. He looked at the son who had promised to put him out to pasture. He looked at the son who had called him slow and sentimental in front of his peers. Then he looked at me. He saw the asset purchase agreement sitting in front of him, the one he had already signed on Saturday, though the others didn't know it yet. He realized I had given him the dignity of a choice in private, but Evan had forced the humiliation in public. Calvin turned to Evan. His face was not angry. It was just tired. It was the face of a man who finally accepted that the story he had told himself about his family was a fiction. "You did this behind my back," Calvin said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "I did it for you," Evan screamed. "You did it for yourself," Calvin said. "You stole from Arthur and Julian. You lied to me. And you tried to use my own daughter to stage a coup." Calvin stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "I accept the terms," Calvin said, looking at me. "Dad?" Evan whispered. "We accept the asset purchase," Calvin said, his voice firming up. He looked at Mercer and Rowe. "Gentlemen, it is the only way to save the staff. It is the only way to pay the debt." Mercer looked at Evan, then back to Calvin. "I agree. We take the deal." "Seconded," Rowe said. "You are kidding me." Evan stood up, knocking his chair over. "You are going to let her dictate terms? She is bluffing. She won't let the firm fail. She needs us." "I don't need you, Evan," I said calmly. "I never did." I signaled to Robert Vance. He slid 3 binders across the table to Calvin, Mercer, and Rowe. "These are the transfer agreements," I said. "They require immediate signature. Once signed, your employment with Hale, Mercer, and Rowe is terminated, and your new contracts with Westbridge begin effective tomorrow morning." Evan stood alone on his side of the table. The other 3 men, the men who had raised him, mentored him, and covered for him, were picking up pens. They were not looking at him. They were looking at the lifeboats I had just thrown them. "This is betrayal," Evan said, his voice shaking. "I am your son." "And I am a lawyer," Calvin said, not looking up as he signed his name. "And for the first time in a long time, I am acting like one." The sound of 3 pens scratching against paper filled the room. It was a dry, rhythmic sound. I watched Evan. I saw the moment the reality hit him. He wasn't just losing a job. He was left holding the bag. He was the only partner remaining in a hollow shell that was about to be hit with lawsuits, audits, and debt collectors. I had isolated the cancer, and now I was closing the patient up. "What about me?" Evan asked, his voice small. "What happens to the shell?" "That is between you and the auditors," I said. "Westbridge has no interest in that entity." I looked at Ms. Lynn. "Please ensure the chain of custody for the evidence is secure. If there are any further attempts to interfere with the transition, we will be forced to release the full due diligence report to the authorities." It was a final warning. Walk away now, or go to jail. Evan looked at me. Hate radiated off him, hot and useless. He grabbed his briefcase. "You will regret this." He spat at me. "You think you won? You just killed your family." "I saved the parts worth saving," I said. Evan turned and stormed out of the room. The heavy door slammed behind him, but the sound was swallowed by the thick carpet and the acoustic paneling. It didn't echo. It just ended. The room was quiet. Calvin, Mercer, and Rowe sat with their signed contracts. They looked like shipwreck survivors sitting on a beach. "Welcome to Westbridge and Crow," I said. "We expect you at orientation tomorrow at 8:30. I didn't smile. I didn't offer congratulations. I simply closed my folder, stood up, and walked out the back door. The trap had sprung, the catch was secured, and the pest had been removed. It was clean. It was precise. It was exactly what my father had taught me to do. The fallout from the boardroom massacre was immediate and loud. While the ink was drying on the transfer agreements, my own firm was fracturing down the middle. The executive committee at Westbridge and Crowe met on Thursday afternoon to ratify the acquisition I had engineered. The room was divided into two distinct camps. On one side sat the expansionists, the partners who saw the client list and the sheer volume of billable hours we were absorbing and practically salivated. On the other side were the risk managers, the men and women who looked at the name Hale and saw only a liability smoke signal. We are buying a burning building. Sarah Jenkins, the head of our ethics committee, argued, tossing the due diligence report onto the table. Aurora Sanders, this forensic report is terrifying. Insurance fraud, spoliation of evidence, a managing partner who let his son run a Ponzi scheme from the billing department. Why are we touching this? Because we aren't buying the building, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. We are buying the furniture and the people, and we are leaving the fire to burn itself out on the other side of the street. I stood up and projected the final structure onto the screen. This is a clean asset purchase, I explained, pointing to the diagram. We are acquiring the employment contracts of 42 associates and 3 senior partners. We are acquiring the client files, subject to new engagement letters signed directly with Westbridge. We are not acquiring Hale, Mercer, and Rowe as a legal entity. We are not acquiring their tail insurance policy. We are not acquiring their debt. But the reputation, Sarah countered. Calvin Hale is coming over as senior counsel. If he gets indicted for what happened at his old firm, he will be sitting in our office when the handcuffs go on. He won't be, I said. I have included a bad actor clause in his consulting agreement. If any regulatory body brings charges against him for prior conduct, his contract with us terminates immediately and without severance. We are insulated. I looked around the room. I saw the doubt. They trusted my numbers, but they didn't trust my bloodline. They were wondering if I was saving my father out of sentimentality. I am not doing this to save a family member, I said, reading their minds. I am doing this because there is $12 million in annual revenue sitting on the table, and I can capture it for 10 cents on the dollar. The price of admission is managing one old man's ego and firing one toxic son. I have already fired the son, and I have the father under contract. Robert Vance leaned forward. And the compliance onboarding? Aggressive, I said. Every file that comes over gets a full audit. Every associate goes through a 2-week ethics boot camp. Zero tolerance for undisclosed exposure. If we find a single skeleton they didn't tell us about, we claw back the purchase price. The room went quiet. They looked at the numbers. They looked at the safeguards. They realized that I had constructed a fortress around the deal. All in favor? Robert asked. The hands went up. It was unanimous. I had the green light, but the hardest conversation was still ahead of me. I found Calvin in the temporary office we had assigned him on the 38th floor. It was a nice office, respectable, but it was half the size of his old suite, and it looked out over the HVAC units of the adjacent building rather than the harbor. He was packing a box of personal items he had brought over, a few framed degrees, a crystal paperweight, a photograph of my mother. He looked out of place, like a lion in a petting zoo. The committee approved the deal, I said, closing the door behind me. Calvin nodded slowly. He didn't turn around. I assumed they would. You made it very favorable for them. It keeps you out of bankruptcy. Calvin, it allows you to pay off the bank. I know, he said. He turned to face me. He looked tired. The deep lines around his mouth etched with a sudden, profound exhaustion. I am not ungrateful. Aurora Sanders, I know what you did. You saved Arthur and Julian. You saved the kids in the associate pool. I saved the business, I corrected. The people were just the inventory. It was a harsh thing to say, but I needed to maintain the distance. I couldn't let him think we were suddenly allies. Can I ask you something? Calvin asked. He sat down on the edge of the desk, disregarding the chair. And I want you to give me a real answer, not a lawyer's answer. Go ahead. Why didn't you burn me? He asked. You had the evidence. You could have sent the Oakhaven file to the bar. You could have watched me lose everything. After the way I treated you. After the things I said. Why did you offer me a lifeboat? I stood by the door, my hand still on the handle. Because I am not you. He flinched, just slightly. I don't destroy people to prove I am strong, I said. I don't need to humiliate you to know I won. The victory is in the contract. Calvin, it is in the fact that you are sitting in my building, drawing a salary from my payroll. That is enough. Calvin looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick. I didn't think you could do it, he said softly. All those years ago, when I said you were too soft, I really believed it. I know you did. But it wasn't just doubt, he admitted. He looked up, and his eyes were shockingly vulnerable. It was fear. Fear of what? That I would fail? No, he said. Fear that you wouldn't need me. He took a breath. Evan. Evan was needy. He was loud and brash. But underneath, he was always looking for me to tell him he was good enough. He was controllable. I could mold him. I could be the patriarch because he needed a father. He looked at me with a sad, crooked smile. But you? Even at 10 years old. You were self-contained. You were inevitable. Aurora Sanders. You stared at me with those big eyes. And I knew that you saw right through me. You didn't need me to tell you who you were, and that terrified me. A father wants to be needed. So I picked the child who needed me, and I pushed away the one who intimidated me. I felt a crack in my chest, a small, hairline fracture in the armor I had worn for 20 years. He feared me. He hadn't rejected me because I was weak. He had rejected me because I was already strong, and he didn't know how to parent strength. That is a hell of a thing to admit, I said, my voice thick. It is the truth, Calvin said. I built Evan up because he was an extension of my ego. I tried to tear you down because you were a threat to it, and look where it got us. Evan destroyed my firm to please me, and you saved it to spite me. He stood up and walked toward me. He stopped 3 feet away. The distance was safe. I am sorry, he said, for not seeing you, for not calling, for everything. I looked at him. I wanted to accept it. I wanted to hug him and cry and have the movie moment where the music swells and the family is healed. But I was a surgeon, and surgeons don't close the wound until they are sure the infection is gone. I accept your apology, I said. My tone was cool, precise. But we are not going to rewrite history. Calvin, we are not going to pretend the last decade didn't happen. You are here because you signed a contract. You are an employee of this firm. I understand, he said. And there are terms, I continued. First, absolute transparency. If I find out you are hiding anything else, a single unbilled hour, a single side deal, you are gone. Second, you treat me as the managing partner, not your daughter. In this building, I am your boss. Agreed. And third, I said, you do not speak to Evan about firm business. If he calls you for inside information, you report it to me. If he tries to use you to get a foothold back in, you block the number. He is outside the wall. Calvin winced. The pain of cutting off his son was real, fresh, and raw, but he nodded. I can't save him anymore, Calvin whispered. I know that now. Good. There is one more thing, Calvin said. I want to make a statement. To the partners. To the staff. What kind of statement? A concession, he said. I will send a memo to the entire transition team. I will state clearly that I'm stepping down, that the old firm failed due to leadership errors, and that I fully endorse your management. I will take the heat. Aurora Sanders. I will let them know this wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a rescue. It was a significant offer. He was offering to publicly fall on his sword to legitimize my command. He was offering his pride as collateral. That would be helpful, I said. Draft it. Send it to me for review before it goes out. Of course. He turned back to his box. I will have it on your desk by 5. I walked out of his office. I felt lighter, but also hollow. I had the truth. I had the apology. But I also knew that some things couldn't be fixed. We would never be a normal family. We were colleagues now, partners in a salvage operation. And maybe that was enough. I walked down the hall toward the elevators. I needed coffee. Arthur Mercer was waiting for me by the reception desk. He looked nervous, wringing his hands. Aurora Sanders, he said. Do you have a minute? Walk with me, Arthur, I said. We stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us in. I just wanted to thank you, Mercer said, for the deal, for saving the pension. I didn't think we were going to make payroll next week. It was a sound business decision, I said automatically. There is something you should know, Mercer said. He lowered his voice, even though we were alone. About the vote. What vote? The vote we had scheduled for this Friday, Mercer said. Before you sent the proposal. Before the meeting. I looked at him. What are you talking about? Julian and I, Mercer said, looking at his shoes. We had already decided. We were going to vote to remove Calvin as managing partner. We had the votes. We were going to fire him. Aurora Sanders. We were going to force him into retirement and try to sell the pieces to Kincaid. I stared at him. The numbers on the elevator panel ticked up. 39, 40. You were going to fire him? We had to, Mercer said. He was blind to what Evan was doing. He was sinking the ship. We loved him, but he was going to kill us all. He looked at me. I just thought you should know. You didn't take his power. Aurora Sanders. He had already lost it. You just saved him from the firing squad. If you hadn't walked in with that deal, he would have been escorted out by security this Friday. The elevator dinged. I see, I said. I walked out. My mind was reeling. The narrative shifted again. I thought I had conquered a tyrant. In reality, I had stepped in front of a bullet meant for him. I had saved his dignity without him even knowing it. If he knew his own partners were days away from ousting him, it would have destroyed him completely. I decided then and there that I would never tell him. That would be my mercy. But the day wasn't over. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah, my assistant. Text. You need to get down to the lobby. Now. It's Evan. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs. Running down 2 flights to the atrium level. The lobby of Westbridge and Crow was a cavernous space of glass and steel. In the corner, near the coffee bar where the associates gathered, a crowd had formed. In the center of the circle was Evan. He looked manic. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled. He was holding a stack of papers, waving them in the air like a preacher. Don't sign, Evan was shouting to a group of 20 young associates, the very people I was trying to onboard. Don't sign their contracts. It is a trap. They are going to work you to death and then fire you in 6 months. They just want the client files. Once they have the contacts, they will dump you. Evan, I said, my voice projecting across the lobby. The crowd parted. Evan turned to face me. He looked desperate. He looked dangerous. There she is, Evan yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. The Grim Reaper. She tricked our father. She stole the firm, and now she wants to turn you all into serfs in her corporate plantation. He turned back to the associates. I am starting a new firm, a boutique, real litigation. Who is with me? We can walk out right now. We can take the clients. We can build something real, not this soulless corporate machine. The associates looked uncomfortable. They were young, scared, and carrying 6 figures of student loan debt. They looked at Evan, sweating and shouting, and then they looked at me. I didn't shout. I didn't call security. I walked into the center of the circle. I stood next to Evan. I was calm. I was composed. I was the adult in the room. You are offering them a new firm, Evan? I asked quietly. With what capital? With what insurance? With what client retainers? We will find the capital, Evan said. We have the talent. I turned to the associates. I made eye contact with the lead associate, a brilliant young woman named Priya. Evan is offering you a dream, I said, my voice steady and clear. He is offering you a spot in a firm that does not exist, funded by money he does not have, insured by a policy that has been voided for fraud. I signaled to Sarah, who had followed me down. She was holding a box of thick white envelopes. I am offering you reality, I said. I took the first envelope. This is an employment contract with Westbridge & Crow, I said. It guarantees your current salary, plus a 10% transition bonus. It includes full health benefits, effective immediately. It includes a clear partnership track, and most importantly, it includes malpractice insurance that actually protects you. I held the envelope out to Priya. It is a 2-year guaranteed term, I said. No layoffs, no tricks, just work and pay. Priya looked at the envelope. She looked at Evan, who was empty-handed and vibrating with manic energy. Don't take it, Priya, Evan pleaded. He is selling you out. He is a dinosaur. I am not a dinosaur. Evan, I said. I am the bank. Priya reached out. She took the envelope. Thank you. Ms. Hale, she said. That broke the dam. One by one. The associates stepped forward. Sarah handed out the envelopes. They took the paper. They took the security. They took the future. Evan stood there, watching his army defect. He tried to grab a young man's arm. Mike, come on. We closed the Henderson deal together. Sorry. Evan, Mike said, taking the envelope from Sarah. I have a mortgage. Within 3 minutes, every associate had an envelope. Evan was standing alone in the middle of the lobby. He looked at me with pure hatred. You bought them. I treated them like professionals, I said. You treated them like an audience. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Get out of my building. Evan, security is on the way. If you come back, I will have you arrested for trespassing, and then I will start making calls about Oakhaven. Evan looked around. He saw the security guards approaching. He saw the associates turning their backs on him to open their offer letters. He saw that he had lost everything. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out the revolving doors, disappearing into the noise of the city street. I watched him go. I turned back to the group of young lawyers. They were reading their contracts, their faces relaxing as they saw the numbers. Orientation is at 8:30 tomorrow, I announced. Welcome to Westbridge. I walked back toward the elevators. My legs felt heavy. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a dull ache in my bones. I had won the war. I had secured the peace. I had saved the father who feared me and banished the brother who betrayed me. I pressed the button for the 44th floor. I had paid the price for mercy. I just hoped the receipt wouldn't bounce. The final week of January arrived with a forecast of snow, turning the city into a grayscale landscape of slush and steel. Inside the boardroom of Westbridge & Crow, the atmosphere was just as cold, but significantly more brittle. It was closing week. The deal, the asset purchase agreement that would dismantle Hale, Mercer, and Rowe and absorb its viable organs into my firm, was on the agenda for a final, irrevocable vote. This was the finish line. One decision that determines whether the legacy firm survives as a solvent shell or dissolves into bankruptcy. The room was full. The entire executive committee of Westbridge was present. Calvin, Arthur Mercer, and Julian Rowe were seated at the far end. Technically guests, but practically petitioners waiting for the verdict. I sat at the head of the table. I had slept 4 hours in the last 2 days. My focus was absolute. I had checked every clause, every warranty, and every schedule of assets. I was ready. The agenda item is the acquisition of select assets from Hale, Mercer, and Rowe, Robert Vance announced, his voice echoing in the acoustic stillness. We have reviewed the terms. We have reviewed the compliance audit. The motion is to proceed to a final vote. One moment, a voice cut in from the speakerphone in the center of the table. It was the general counsel for the Oversight Committee. "We have received a filing," the voice said, tinny and distorted. 30 minutes ago, a formal complaint was lodged with the State Bar Association and copied to this committee. It alleges a conflict of interest regarding the managing partner, Aurora Sanders Hale. The complainant argues that the valuation of the assets was manipulated due to familial bias, and that the deal constitutes a fraudulent transfer to disenfranchise a minority shareholder. The room went silent. "Who is the complainant?" Robert asked, though we all knew the answer. "Evan Hale," the general counsel replied. I did not blink. I did not look at Calvin. I looked straight at the speakerphone. Evan was trying to burn the house down from the outside. He knew he couldn't stop the deal with votes, so he was trying to stop it with procedure. He wanted to freeze the transaction, force an investigation, and delay us long enough for the bank to foreclose, destroying everything rather than letting me win. It was a suicide vest strapped to a legal motion. "This is a delay tactic," Arthur Mercer whispered, his face pale. "If we delay, the credit line expires on Friday. We will be insolvent." "That is his goal," I said calmly. "Aurora Sanders," Robert said, looking concerned. "A conflict of interest complaint is serious. If we proceed, and the bar rules against us later, the entire acquisition could be unwound. We might need to pause." "We do not pause," I said. I opened the black binder that had been sitting next to me. I had anticipated this. Evan was predictable. He was a man who believed that if he made enough noise, the rules would bend. He forgot that I was the one who wrote the rules. "I have prepared a response packet," I said, sliding copies down the table to the committee members. "Tab 1, I instructed. "You will see a conflict waiver signed by every partner at Hale, Mercer, and Rowe, including Evan Hale, dated 3 years ago when I first took the managing partner role at Westbridge. It explicitly waives any future conflict claims regarding my relationship to Calvin Hale." I heard pages turning. "Tab 2, I continued. "An independent valuation report commissioned from a third-party accounting firm in New York. I recused myself from the pricing strategy. The $12 million valuation was set by them, not me. It is mathematically defensible to the penny." "And tab 3, I said, my voice dropping an octave. "A series of emails from Evan Hale to Kincaid and Lewis, dated 2 weeks ago, in which he explicitly outlines his plan to file a frivolous complaint to, quote, blow up the deal, if he did not receive a payout. This proves malicious intent. It proves the complaint is not about ethics. It is about extortion." I looked at the committee. "This is not a legal obstacle," I said. "It is a temper tantrum. If we pause now, we validate his sabotage. We proceed." The committee members looked at the emails. They looked at the waiver. The tension in the room shifted from anxiety to resolve. I had stripped Evan of his weapon before he could even pull the trigger. "The documentation is clear," the general counsel said over the phone. "The complaint lacks merit. The vote can proceed." But the air was still heavy. The accusation of familial bias hung over the table. The partners were looking at me, then at Calvin. They needed reassurance that this wasn't just a daughter bailing out a father. They needed to know this was business. Calvin stood up. He didn't ask for permission. He simply rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket with a hand that was steady and sure. He looked at the Westbridge partners. He looked at the people who were about to decide his fate. "I would like to speak," Calvin said. "Calvin," I warned softly, "this is a voting session." "I know," he said, "and there is something that needs to be entered into the record." He walked to the front of the room. He didn't look like a defeated man anymore. He looked like the litigator he used to be, commanding, precise, and authoritative. "For 20 years, Calvin began, his voice filling the room. "I told myself a story. I told myself that to be a great lawyer, you had to be ruthless, you had to be loud, you had to be a killer. I raised my son to be that way, and I dismissed my daughter because she was careful, because she was quiet." He paused, looking directly at Robert Vance. "I was wrong," Calvin said. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the hard drives in the server rack. The complaint filed by my son alleges that Aurora Sanders Hale is acting out of sentiment, Calvin continued, that she is protecting me. But the truth is, she stripped my firm to the studs. She audited us harder than the IRS. She demanded terms that were brutal, exacting, and completely necessary. He turned to look at me. His eyes were clear. There was no negotiation in them, only recognition. I have sat across the table from the best litigators in this country, Calvin said. I have argued before the Supreme Court, and I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that Aurora Sanders Hale is the most capable lawyer in this room. She is not saving me because I am her father. She is acquiring my firm because she outmaneuvered me. She saw the value where I saw only chaos. She saw the solution where I saw only ruin. He placed his hand on the mahogany table. You should not vote for this deal because it is kind, Calvin said. You should vote for it because she constructed it perfectly, and if you don't buy us, she will probably find a way to sue us for wasting her time, and she will win that too. A ripple of laughter, nervous, relieved laughter, went through the room. I endorse this acquisition, Calvin finished, not as a father, but as a managing partner who finally knows when he has been beaten by the better counsel. He sat down. I felt a lump form in my throat. Hard and sudden. I swallowed it down. I kept my face impassive. This was work. Thank you. Mr. Hale, I said. I turned to the committee. All in favor of the acquisition? Every hand went up. The motion carries, Robert announced. The deal is closed. It was over. The tension broke like a fever. Papers were shuffled. Hands were shaken. Laptops were closed. The acquisition was official. The associates were safe. The clients were transitioned. The liabilities were contained in the old shell. Far away from my firm. I stood up and began to pack my files. My hands were shaking. Just slightly. It was the adrenaline crash. The room emptied out until it was just me and Calvin. He walked over to where I was standing. He didn't say anything at first. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and gold. It was his ring. The Hale, Mercer, and Rowe signet ring. He had worn it every day since I was born. It was the symbol of his authority, the heavy gold band that he used to rap against the dinner table when he wanted silence. He held it out to me. I can't wear this anymore, he said. The firm doesn't exist. Keep it, I said. It's yours. It's history. No, Calvin said. He took my hand, my right hand, and pressed the ring into my palm. It was warm from his pocket. It's not history, it's a reminder. Of what? Of the mistake I made, he said quietly. I thought the power was in the ring. I thought it was in the name. But it was in the discipline. You have that. I never did. I just had the volume. He closed my fingers over the gold. You run it better than I ever did, he said. It wasn't a sentimental passing of the torch. It was an unconditional surrender. He was acknowledging that the kingdom wasn't inherited. It was conquered. Thank you, Dad, I said. I will see you at orientation, he said. 8:30 sharp. I won't be late. He walked out of the boardroom. He walked with a lighter step, as if the weight of the crumbling empire had finally been lifted off his shoulders. I stood alone in the empty room. I opened my hand and looked at the ring. It was heavy, scratched from decades of use. I didn't put it on. I slipped it into my pocket. I didn't need his ring to have power. I had my own. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The snow had started to fall, dusting the skyscrapers in white. I thought about the speech I was supposed to give to the new associates tomorrow. I thought about what people would say. They would say I was tough. They would say I was ruthless. They would say I turned my trauma into fuel. But that wasn't true. I didn't thank the pain for making me strong. I didn't thank the neglect for making me independent. I didn't thank Evan for making me competitive. I thanked myself. I thanked the version of me who studied until sunrise while everyone else was sleeping. I thanked the version of me who drove home alone from that dinner and decided not to cry. I thank the discipline. The pain didn't build me. The pain was just the resistance I had to push against. I built me. I had won, but I hadn't won by crushing my father. I hadn't won by destroying Evan, though he had destroyed himself. I had won by making them face reality. I had forced them to look at the ledger and see the truth they had been avoiding for 20 years. I had proved, on paper, in public, and in practice, that I was a real lawyer, and I had been one long before he learned to say it. I turned away from the window. I had work to do. There were 42 new associates starting tomorrow, and they needed a leader who knew exactly where the bodies were buried and how to make sure they never came back. Clients don't wait, and neither do I. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute? At the gym? Or maybe relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Monica Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.